Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and invite Richard to start when he's ready. But before he starts, a reminder, um, we're here to present evidence, and if time allows, to ask questions of the presenter. And I don't know, Richard, how long can you stay with us today? Do you know?
2.5 hours.
Okay, I hope it doesn't take that long. But if your presentation takes 2 hours, then I may invite you to stay for 30 minutes so folks can ask questions, and I can. So folks, note your questions as you go along. Don't speak them out. We'll do the questions at the end, as we did with Bob, as time allows. And then if time doesn't allow, we'll try to schedule another meeting for follow-up questions and so forth. So Richard, at this point, thank you for coming. I invite you to start when you're ready.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We'll be talking about the directed energy weapons hypothesis today, and we dare everybody to know and research the facts and come to your own conclusions. And these are widely different theories that contradict each other quite a bit. We'll start with Building 7. This was a 47-story skyscraper, easily the tallest building in most of our states, not hit by a plane. And yet it went down, as you'll see, in the afternoon at 5:20. It was about 100 yards north of the North Tower. And after the towers went down, it was indeed hit by some of the debris from the North Tower, which was, as we will see, laterally ejected. And some of that material hit the southwest corner of the building, and and this is a contradictory set of damage to the building that in this case would cause it to fall over, in the case of the photo, to the right, to the southwest, versus the official narrative that we all disagree with, that claims that thermal expansion caused the collapse of this building in the northeast corner. So there's a fraudulent report that's been put out by NIST that we all agree with that characterization of it. Let's look at the collapse, though. We have the east penthouse collapsing first in an isolated event 6 seconds prior to the overall collapse of this building. And we won't go into the mechanisms of that in this, but then 6 seconds later, the entire building does this, straight down, uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint, in the exact manner of a classic controlled demolition. There is no difference, save the sounds of explosions, which are different, the flashes of light, which are different, and we'll get to those. So right away, we have a theory that's been excluded, not only by NIST, but by the promoters of the directed energy weapons hypothesis, based on evidence, which we'll be examining also in this talk today. So we look at the typical features of controlled demolition in our presentations on this subject because, hey, it looks like a controlled demolition. Is it one? Well, you'll see that it is. We start with a sudden onset of destruction, usually at the base of the structure. Let's listen to Dan Rather narrate his view of the collapse of this building.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What was that, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Well, this is his intuitive view. We've all seen, like, the old hotels in Las Vegas. We know a controlled demolition when we see one. And we have... Let's put Ross there. Thanks, Ross. Straight down. Do we have a Do we have a straight down symmetrical collapse of the building? Feature number 2 of controlled demolition. Let's look from West Street. Yeah, pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How do they accomplish that? Well, directed energy weapons has never accomplished this, but of course controlled demolition has. You actually have to take out all of the core columns within a fraction of a second of each other, followed about a second later by the perimeter columns within a fraction of a second of each other. And then repeating that within a few fractions of a second, floor by floor, down the building. Now, right off the bat, intuitively, we know what can do this: explosives. Directed energy weapon is going to take out these columns with that level of precision. Come on. We have a fire that can't do it either. So we all agree with that. What happens if you don't get it just right, or all those explosives don't go off? You have the building which falls over. It's a real problem. Wouldn't you expect from some unknown, untested technology that the building might obey the laws of entropy, increasing chaos, and fall over instead of straight down all the way to the ground? There's no mechanism provided for any kind of accuracy on the part of the promoters of DEW. If a building is even having a problem on one side, it's going to fall to that side. Any deviation in the structural removal of those structural columns. How fast is the building coming down? Well, it's been measured by physics experts all around. It's free fall. How fast is that? That's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. That means what? That not one of these columns gave any resistance for that period of free fall, which was a third of its 7-second fall. Not one. There's no mechanism described at how, from the DEW promoters, how all the columns can be removed at once for that period of time, a third of the building's fall. NIST finally acknowledges this, that it did come down at free fall. This is not discussed by the promoters. And so we have to look at those columns. Did any of these columns give any resistance for that period of time? No. What happened to all those columns all at once? Fire certainly didn't. We all agree on that. Feature number 5, total dismemberment of the building. This building falls like a house of cards, meaning what? That all of the columns have been cut and their column to beam connections so that it could fall a 47-story compressed to about 6 stories at its peak. So keep asking ourselves the question, could some kind of energy weapon do this? Buildings that fall naturally, or that are weakened inside, or that, in this case, earthquakes, they fall over to the path of least resistance. There's no severing of the columns and beams in these buildings. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder, which we'll be looking at. No, it falls like a house of cards. And these fires and directed energy weapons cannot do that. We could say that safely because they have not done that. And so we're manufacturing a theory and then looking for evidence, which is scant, to prove it. Do we have sounds of explosions heard by witnesses? Well, here's Daryl, right next, medical student, standing right next to the building.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. Then, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that.
Well, there's an order of events, isn't there? A sound of a clap of thunder before the building falls. You won't hear the promoters of DEW dealing with this reality. Oh, they say they were Scott packs. They were fire extinguishers. No, these sounds rocked the area around the World Trade Center like this one.
You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Not a Scott pack, not a fire extinguisher, but a second before the building came down. Thank you, Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic. How about Bill Rosati?
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere.
A big flash.
Like.
That's not discussed by the promoters. None of these are, by the way. They work their way around all of these witnesses of explosions before Building 7 and, as you'll see, the Twin Towers came down. Here's Richard Patterson, FDNY, first responder.
1-7 let go as well, and was a series of concussive explosions.
And he clarified that that was before the building came down. Patrick Dillon, first responder, same thing.
I remember feeling that like it was like freight trains underneath the earth, shaking the earth, even shaking me. That's when we all saw Building 7 crumple in the middle, like way up at the top. It buckled and then dropped.
And Deputy Director in New York's Office of Emergency Management, who examined the building inside and noticed some terrifying things.
Then he had to go into that building to assess it.
You could hear the building creak above us. You could hear things fall. You could hear the fire burning. You could see columns just hanging from the upper floors, gaping holes in the floors up above us. There was an elevator car that was blown out of its shaft, and it was down the hall.
Down the hall, how far? 40 feet, he declared. An elevator cab blown out of its shaft down the hall 40 feet. We hear from the promoters that everything that goes boom isn't a bomb. Well, this is not a Scott pack or a fire extinguisher that blew the elevator cab 40 feet down the hall, with leaving gaping holes with columns dangling in the middle of this building in the afternoon. How about Barry Jennings, New York Office of Emergency Management from the Housing Department? He and Mayor Giuliani's attorney, Michael Hess, were called to a meeting because the plane had hit the towers and they were late. They didn't realize the entire building had been evacuated. So they make their way up to this meeting wondering what's really going on here. This is their experience on the way down.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom, like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, "You have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run."
These explosions are coincident and supportive of Richard Rotan's testimony of the elevator car being blown out. But these guys were in the building. We don't know exactly when those explosions happened, but this one was in the late morning of 9/11. Is this a Scott pack or a fire extinguisher going off?
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
No, this is what people were hearing. This is what people were hearing all through the late morning and the early afternoon in the vicinity of Building 7.
There's been a 4th explosion at the World Trade Center. Just reported.
Hey.
There's been a 4th explosion at the World Trade Center. Just reported.
There are 7 of those testimonies. And I'll put them
We
on
hate
the...
to interrupt you. We've just been
Here we
told
go.
A fourth
of a
explosion.
fourth explosion.
Now in the
at
area
World
of the
Trade
World
Center.
Trade Centers. Obviously, neither tower is still standing. We don't know the source of this fourth explosion.
Good morning again, Pat. I am actually just across from City Hall. It's unbelievable because you hear these explosions. In fact, I just heard another one. I don't know if it was like an after effect or whatnot. It wasn't as big, obviously, as the other ones, but it still sent a tremor all the way over here, and I'm obviously on the other side of the World Trade Center, on the other side of the city. And it's just unbelievable. And then I'm hearing another explosion, just so you know. I'm hearing another rumble. It's not as bad as the other ones were. What you can feel when these tremors come is that it literally comes up under your feet. That's what it feels like. That's the best way I know to describe it.
A building very close by, about 2 blocks away next to an elementary school, causing another explosion. So for the last few minutes, I've been watching people running from that direction. So as people are coming up the street, running from the scene of this new explosion, you can see them slipping on the ash and literally having to drag each other up the street.
Well, we just heard another explosion go off a couple of minutes ago, Chris, and saw a bunch more people sort of running this way. A woman on her bike was screaming as it went off, and there was a New York City officer. He was plain clothes walking by with a radio. I tried to stop him to ask what happened, and all he said was car bomb, car bomb.
And then I don't know what it was, John, but another explosion, a rolling blast of fire, a rolling column of fire towards us. If my respect for fire and police already knew no bounds, given the danger, it now exceeds what I thought it could, because a firefighter threw me into the wall of a building, covered me with his body as the flames approached us. The police and the fire working in there are doing so against really dangerous odds, and they still don't know if there's something else left to explode.
Where were you at the time?
I was directed by a firefighter who said, walk down the middle of the road because you don't know what's going to come down, at which point we heard a rumble like I've never heard before, and a firefighter ran towards me.
Was this from the first second?
John, I looked at my watch. It was about 10:44 is what my watch said. So it was after the second, I think the second tower explosion.
All right.
There's just been another explosion, and as happened with the last two, it may be a car bomb. That's what we were hearing from passing police officers. The last two were thought to be car bombs. This third one, I haven't had any confirmation on it yet, but there is, I mean, the plumes of smoke have been so thick anyway.
What's so frightening at this time is that we've heard 3 explosions since both towers collapsed.
Lester, there have been about four explosions here since about 11 o'clock. The most recent about 2 minutes ago that seemed to shake the ground that we're on. We're about a block and a half away from what used to be the World Trade Center.
We're obviously having a bit of trouble right now maintaining our location because we just heard one more explosion. That's about the 4th one we've heard. The police are telling us they're either car bombs.
This is why it's so difficult for them in this area where we are. Imagine they came here originally to deal with the crisis. They set up some command centers, and they had many of their chiefs and many of their supervisors in the area of the building. The second and third explosions literally have wreaked havoc on those field forces and those command centers, so they've had to back up, and now they're trying to see how they can approach it again.
So there was some kind of additional explosion, but I don't know what it was. Definitely. Smoke was rising from the ground. Maybe it was a federal building or something like that. Now 11 o'clock. Still hear continuing explosions. There's another explosion.
The promoters of the DEW theory don't show these witnesses. Why not? The official narrative says, records a 0.6 magnitude earthquake relative to Building 7, which is interesting because the signal occurs about 10 seconds prior to the building collapsing. Well, this is very interesting. These are the explosions, are they, that the witnesses are hearing before the building comes down. That's what the conclusion we could draw. Nis says, oh no, this was the building coming down behind The shell of the building is the interior, and it's coming down first, and that's what these seismic signals are. But if the building were coming down inside this building, it would be pulling in the exterior perimeter structural steel frame and breaking thousands of windows and granite panels. But that's not happening. So this east penthouse fall, approximately 6 seconds prior, is 4 seconds after the seismic event, which can only be an explosion. And so the east penthouse falls, and then 6 seconds later, the entire building comes down. So applied geophysics expert Andre, author of more than 50 published peer-reviewed papers on progressive mechanical waves and geology, concludes the bell-like form of that graph points to an impulsive source of energy, not percussion on the ground due to the falling of the debris. The seismic waves are only created by brief impulses, low frequencies. These undeniably have an explosive origin. Well, where's the seismic signal? The promoters say from the building itself falling. Well, the building falls over a period of 6, 7, 8 seconds altogether, and it's hitting the ground, not slamming into the ground like the promoters suggest. It's falling floor by floor and absorbed, and that signal is not picked up 20 miles away by the seismic equipment. So what do the experts say? Well, here's one of the top European controlled demolition experts.
Danny Jowenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Het heeft een team gedaan van experts.
A hired job, but done by a team of experts. It can only be that. Well, he's one of them, without financial or political obligations that might have swayed his objective opinion on to what brought this building down. Okay. The controlled demolition experts around the country will not offer their opinion. Well, they offer not an objective opinion because they are financed largely by federal money, which to take down some of these buildings. So what is one of the 29 structural engineers signed on to the petition at AE 911 Truth? What is he saying? A localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without what? A simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. There's absolutely no theory provided as to how such accuracy might have been provided by the promoters of the DEW. So we have an analysis done to refute NISTs. And what did they conclude at the University of Alaska with the top forensic structural engineer, one of them in the country? They concluded that the fire did not cause the collapse of this building. The temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. Thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and girders. The collapse of this building was a global failure involving what? The near simultaneous failure of every column in the building. What can do that? Untested, directed energy, taking out all the columns on a floor, floor by floor. Come on. Feature number 9. We have evidence of extreme heat. What are we talking about? Let's go to Massimo Mazzucco's 9/11 New Pearl Harbor for a start.
Possibly the most important unexplained phenomenon at Ground Zero are the extremely high temperatures registered under the rubble for many weeks after the collapses. On September 16, NASA shot these thermographic images of Ground Zero, indicating unusually high temperatures at the base of the 3 collapsed buildings. Despite the heavy rains of September 14th, the hotspots registered peak temperatures of more than 1,300 degrees under the rubble. 10 days later, the fires kept burning.
What's to explain, Governor,
the smoke that still comes out. There's still fire down below. There is such an incredibly deep pile of rubble, and the tower goes down 5-6 stories underground.
But we had ABC crews come back just in the last few minutes and telling us there are.
Oh, shoot.
Hours.
On October 8th, the hotspots under the 6 weeks later, as the excavations progressed, the situation seemed only to get worse.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter.
The promoters suggest that this smoke is fuming from steel dissociating. Well, I suggest that it's smoke. What do you think, as John Cole says?
It's probably 1,500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was a core at some point, and it looked like an oven. You know, it was just roaring inside. And it's just a bright reddish-orange color.
The consequences of such extreme temperatures were quite visible on the steel that was being extracted from the rubble.
Where the grapplers were pulling stuff out, big sections of iron that were literally on fire on the other end. They would hit the air and burst into flames, which was pretty spooky to see.
You would create an air pocket by moving steel, fueling the fires underground. But, you know, these underground fires were just like the fires of hell.
If you could make a video of what you perceive hell to look like, from fire shooting up at times, that's what would happen. You would be in the middle of what would look like steel, and then fire just would pop up. Firemen were coming out with, and ironworkers with their boots literally melted, and then the hose would come over and they would try to put that part out.
I got there.
Charlie Vichers was a supervisor of removal operations at Ground Zero. From PBS's America Rebuilds page, we read, Vichers' crew picked up 40 to 60-foot-long pieces of steel impaled in the pile, where the bottom 20 feet would be glowing red hot. Vichers said, trucks loaded with steel would pass by, and you could feel the back of your neck burning standing 20 feet away. In an article called A Dangerous Work Site, the U.S. Department of Labor wrote, underground fires burned at temperatures of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Now, for the government to come out and admit this, it violates their own theory of destruction by fires and maximum temperatures of half of this. So when we do get truth leaked out past the censors from the government, we can take note, because this would have been censored if it were not true. But there's so much, as you'll see, overwhelming evidence of it. They can't censor all of it. And the DEW promoters don't play this video. They don't play the explosions witnesses. They don't play the evidence of extreme heat that we're going to be seeing. So that's telling.
This was confirmed by Mayor Giuliani.
There were fires of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit below the ground.
The Journal of the American Society of Safety Engineers wrote, thermal measurements taken by helicopter each day showed underground temperatures ranging from 400 to more than 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit.
For what it's worth, the 28, and it's worth a lot, the 2,800 degrees is 4 or 5 times the temperatures that jet fuel can get to, as you'll see. It's twice of usually the hottest office fires in normal office fires. So none of this can be accounted for by the official narrative, and none of it can be accounted for by the DEW promotion. Why? Because they claim it's a cold event. Well, you're just seeing the beginning of the evidence of extreme heat, all of which they deny, censor, and gatekeep.
8 weeks later, and the fires still had not subsided.
You see how this debris is still smoking? That's from the fires that are still burning. 8 weeks later, we still got fires burning. So, I mean, these things are burning. At one point, I think they were about 2,800 degrees.
11 weeks later, and the fires kept burning.
As recently as the end of November, it was still 1,100 degrees down underneath the rubble.
As November turned into December, ice was noticed in the mornings above the ground. but the debris underneath was still smoldering.
The weird thing was it was very cold when we were up there. I believe it was in the middle of the winter, but the ground wasn't frozen. The ground kind of like bubbled underneath your feet, which was kind of strange to me.
It took until December 19, more than 3 months after the collapses, for the last underground fire to be extinguished.
Okay, so let's dig in a little deeper, shall we? Thermal measurements taken by helicopter each day showed underground temperatures ranging from 400 to more than 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the beginning of melting of steel, which we're also going to see lots of evidence for. So here are the official figures, voices admitting to temperatures hotter than their theory ended up suggesting, which was destruction by fire. So we have, so we also have thermal imaging, the piles at the footprint, which were not burning, by the way, on the surface of the pile. So they're measuring heat at minimum 1,300 degrees and on up. That is at the surface. Well, there's no fire at the surface. What are they measuring? They're measuring heat that was much hotter deeper down, as the firefighters, well, as the others you just heard suggest, that cools off by the time it reaches the surface. So these are just the minimum temperatures at the site that you see here, including at World Trade Center 1, 1,160 degrees Fahrenheit. World Trade Center 2, 1,377 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, is this everywhere on the surface? No. These are spots. Those spots are evidence of extreme heat. They didn't walk over those spots. That's why they're not cooked, as has been a complaint broadly. World Trade Center 7, also 1,340 degrees. There's no fire, as you saw, on the top of the pile after the collapse of Building 7. What are we measuring here? Something much hotter, like 2,800 degrees and more, deeper down in the pile that's cooled off by the time it reaches the surface. So this is evidence and analysis that you also won't see the promoters suggesting. Let's look at the witnesses. It was dripping from the molten steel. Is he lying? Saw pools of literally molten steel, says the president of the cleanup company, seeing the molten steel, uncovering red hot metal beams, ranging from molten metal, which was still red hot weeks after the event. Molten steel at the heart of the tower's remains.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like lava
from a volcano.
Like lava from a volcano. Streams of molten metal that leaked from the hot, not cold, hot cores and flowed down. Metal dripping from a beam. 2,000 degree temperatures.
This is one of the beams that obviously took a lot of heat damage and actually started to melt because it burned right through to the burn hole, and it actually kind of collapsed under itself, and clearly due to the heat. And it's significantly corroded and melted. The backside of it is gone. Intense heat that they've been talking about, the 1,500 degrees to 2,000 degrees.
Molten steel beams. The end of the beam would be dripping with molten steel. Mark Loiseau, president of Controlled Demolition, who had a cleanup contract, molten steel was encountered primarily during the excavation of the debris. He acknowledges this, and yet it violates the official theory from beginning to end. There are both videotape and still photos of molten steel being dipped out by the buckets of the excavators. Videotape, and I'd like to get that videotape, as everybody would, and still photos of this kind of thing, where we have pouring molten metal dripping out of the claws of this crab claw excavator. River of steel flowing. Says who? The structural engineer of the World Trade Center himself was down in the basements, and he saw this, as did his, well, here he is.
One, we were down at the B1 level, and one of the firefighters said, I think you'd be interested in this, and they pulled off a big block of concrete, and there was like a little river of steel flowing.
And his associate, Richard Garlock, the debris past the columns was red hot, not cold, molten, running. Well, interestingly, this is all documented, not all of it, some of it, in a metallurgical examination provided by who? FEMA. Interestingly, before NIST took over the investigation and got rid of this evidence, this documentation. This is in Appendix C of the Building Performance Assessment Team report by FEMA in May of 2002. What did they find in this metallurgical examination? Never before observed. Eutectic reactions. That's when steel gets so hot that, well, it has sulfur added to it, as you'll see, which changes its ability to melt steel. Intergranular melting, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like you see here. This is what thermite, as we'll see, can do to steel, and both in the World Trade Center samples, Building 7, and in the Twin Towers samples. Razor sharpness, thinned to razor sharpness. This was I think a 5/8 inch thick web of this I-beam. Rapid oxidation, sulfidation. Interesting. Where'd the sulfur come from? Liquid iron. That's what? Molten iron and sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. Fascinating. Where'd the sulfur come from? John Field says it burned, the first responder. The smell of sulfur and everything else was a heat, not cold, but heat from the pile. I can never block out that smell. That smell haunts me. That sulfur burning. Well, what's the source of the sulfur? We're going to find out. Perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation, says the New York Times. But this documentation was thrown out of the NIST report largely. They say, in response to a very frequently asked question, where did the sulfur come from? Sulfur is present in gypsum board, they said. Wait a minute. Gypsum board contains inert calcium sulfate. It's never turned around in its 100-year history and attacked the steel that it's been protecting for that long. This is the kind of fraud we get from NIST. Steel was evaporated. Remains of the Trade Center are scrutinized. An I-beam from World Trade Center 7. The shock came when Professor Astani examined the ends of the beam. What did he say? They're normally 5/8 inch thick, but the inferno was so hot, not cold, that the thickness was reduced from 5/8 to 1/8 inch. The steel was evaporated. We'll come back to that word. But listen to George tomorrow, the designer of the bathtub that surrounded the World Trade Center to keep the Hudson River out from the parking garage.
Why people have described this as molten metal, I'm not quite the equivalent of the molten core of the Earth sitting in here. It is really it's an indication of why the fires keep springing up. The material was red hot, and upon exposure, a lot of this material just springs back up. Fire comes to the underground area.
The fire springs up. That's what the response. When you pour water on molten material, you get steam and explosions even. So they had to be very careful. It was a very hazardous event. Steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. Now, this is a fire protection engineer, Jonathan Barnett, on the FEMA team examining the steel. Partly evaporated? Wait a minute. It takes 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit to evaporate steel. What can evaporate the steel? Not fires, not directed energy weapons. They're cold. He says, Astani, I saw melting of girders at the World Trade Center. Well, you can tell close enough by the color of molten metals what its temperature is likely to be. Here we're exceeding 2,500 degrees. This is the physics of molten metal. It's incandescence. Some say, well, no, that would have destroyed the hydraulics in the tractor. This has to be fake. Well, here's a tractor full of very hot, in this case, very hot material. In this case, even hotter material. Look how close to the fire that hydraulic mechanism is, and it's not failing. And neither is the hydraulics. Well, it was hot. They had to spray it down. But look at that red hot molten material pouring out of there. Not pouring, but being carried close to the hydraulics in that. The DEW promoters say, well, where is all of this molten material that cooled if it was there? Well, here's a couple of options. On the right, they call them meteorites, fused molten iron and concrete. And on the left, Bart Vorsanger, architect, discovers many of these multi-ton, previously molten meteorites.
One of the more unusual artifacts to emerge from the rubble is this rock-like object that has come to be known as the meteorite.
It's this fused element of steel, molten steel and concrete and all of these things all fused by the heat.
By the heat. Okay, that's very helpful. And how about the steel itself from the World Trade Center? Oh. What can happen in an environment where thousands of thermite charges are going off, creating a temperatures of 3,000-4,000 degrees Fahrenheit and more? They're just going to melt, not melt, but they can melt, and they did, but like noodles, just form themselves by thousands of degrees of heat, as the ironworkers suggested. That's what can do this to steel. Certainly not jet fuel, which burns, according to this engineer company, petroleum engineer, 600 degrees Fahrenheit maximum. We all agree on that. So, and fires, at the absolute worst case, 1,830 degrees Fahrenheit. Mathematically, worst case, they test them with this just to be sure. Most fires are less than 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. What can do that? Can thermite do that? Well, what is thermite anyway?
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Well, maybe we're getting somewhere here, because if thermite or thermate were used, it would explain the temperatures 4,000 degrees and more. It would explain the presence of sulfur in the aftermath, because there's no other explanation for it. You heard NIST's guess. Because sulfur is added to thermite to become thermate. Much more effective as a eutectic mixture that FEMA found and documented for cutting through steel. It would also explain the presence of other evidence of unignited thermite found in the World Trade Center dust? Well, ignited thermite, and that is what? Iron-rich microspheres throughout all, this is all evidence of ignited thermite. We'll get back to the evidence of unignited thermite. But the U.S. Geological Survey in 2005 did their particle atlas of the World Trade Center dust. What did they find? Billions of what? Previously molten, what does that mean? 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit plus. Iron, where did the iron come from? We haven't used iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years. Iron, molten iron, as we saw, was the byproduct of thermite. Spheres, how do they get spherical? Well, aerosolized liquids form themselves into spheres, particularly if they're explosively dispersed. They get smaller, about the size of a human hair. These particular molten iron microspheres are. The EPA, we're going to use this as a signature component to distinguish the World Trade Center dust from common office building dust. It's very unique, and it's discussed in the work of the R.J. Lee Group. In addition to the U.S. Geological Survey, in their analysis, they show up to 6% of some of these samples. Not every sample, but right next to the World Trade Center, the samples that they studied in the Deutsche Bank building, 6% of those were previously molten iron microspheres. There may be up to 4 tons of this by extrapolation throughout the World Trade Center aftermath, the dust that went everywhere, as we'll see. They say these are formed during the event, not before, by the ironworkers taking the building, welding the building together, not afterwards by the ironworkers taking the building apart, but formed during the event. Well, we saw how that could happen. In fact, if we wonder how that could happen, we could do an experiment. Hey, we could light some thermite. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one. Let's light some thermite. In this very small, controlled experiment, what do we see? Thousands of what look like sparks, but no, they cool, they fall into the pan as previously molten iron microspheres. Thermite produces that. It can also produce melted molybdenum. This is not discussed by the promoters either. Molybdenum is one of the metals, this one, on the periodic table of the elements. The USGS finds that it doesn't melt until 4,700 degrees Fahrenheit. So yes, this was a hot event, an extremely hot event, proving temperatures that only in this context thermite can answer. Evaporated lead. How do they know this? The R.J. Lee Group finds that lead evaporated. What are they talking about? The presence of lead oxide on the surface of the mineral wool indicates the existence of extremely high temperatures during the collapse, which caused metallic lead to volatilize, oxidize, and finally condense on the surface of the surrounding mineral wool. That's one for Bob to take on. Hope he does. Bob Grenier. Now, the clouds the promoters suggest are cold. There's one witness who didn't experience hot clouds, so they used that witness instead of these 10. Then the dust cloud hits us. It got real hot. Felt like it was going to light up almost. A wave, a hot, solid, black wave of heat, not cold, heat threw me down the block. When I was running, some hot stuff went down my back because I didn't have time to put my coat back on, and I had some, well, I guess, 1st and 2nd degree burns. Falling, not cooled yet, molten iron microspheres could create that. What else could create 2nd and 1st degree burns, which are denied, by the way, by the promoters? And then we're engulfed in the smoke, which was horrendous. One thing I remember, it was hot, not cold. The smoke was hot, and that scared me. I remember making it into the tunnel, and it was this incredible amount of wind, debris, heat. I remember a huge blast of hot wind gusting and smoke, dust, all kinds of debris hit me. Hot wind, the super hot wind, blew, and it just got as dark as night. You couldn't breathe. Well, all of that was evidence of heat, and before that, ignited thermite. Is there any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust samples? Well, yeah, a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen identified 7 samples, and they studied them, samples from across the street in Liberty Street in Jeanette McKinley's apartment, for instance. They get real curious about this, and they find these red-gray chips. They thought they were paint at first. They're about a 1/16 of an inch large or longer, or smaller. And interestingly, they're attracted to a magnet. Why? Because they have a high iron content. Well, that's interesting. We have, by the way, there's the promoters suggest that the steel was dustified. We'll see that there's no steel dust in the analysis by different companies and agencies. But if the steel was dustified, it would be picked up by the magnet too. But it's not. What's attracted to the magnet is iron-rich microspheres and this high iron content red-gray chips. I'm pretty sure the red-gray chips are attracted. I actually forgot. Somebody can correct me on that, whether that's true or not. The X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy that they did as a result of this curiosity found what? Peaks of aluminum, proving what? There is aluminum in here. The Millet study said there's no aluminum. Well, here's one proof of aluminum. There are many others. Iron and manganese added to thermite to become thermate along with sulfur. So we find what is expected in unignited thermite in the X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy. So they get real curious. They zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope, and what do they find? Nanoparticles, 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair on average. Iron oxide crystals formed at the nanoscale. Aluminum platelets formed at the nanoscale, mixed into a matrix of what? Organic material. Oxygen, silica, carbon. Organic material is what's added to high energy explosives to do what? Expand rapidly in a gas and knock things over. That's how explosives work. So here we have an incendiary called superthermite, as they did their research, that's been engineered to become more explosive. Explosive composites based on thermite reaction, says Lawrence Livermore Laboratory before 2001, whose fuel and oxidizer constituents are intimately mixed on the nanometer size scale. This is not aluminum cladding falling from the building and rust somehow mixing in the perfect proportion to become thermite or nanothermite, as some of the DEW promoters have suggested. This is a highly engineered product. You see, when you get these particles so small, their surface volume increases exponentially, and you have a chemical reaction that's virtually instantaneous, thus the more explosive. Now, can this material achieve the brisance of high energy explosives? Mark Hightower correctly makes the counter argument that it can't. So nobody that I'm aware of has said thermite is what's responsible for the explosive properties of nanothermite being responsible for the pulverization of concrete, which we're coming to. So it's a red herring is what it is, Mark Hightower's suggestion. There were some 9/11 truth people making that incorrect statement. It is more explosive. It is not explosive like RDX. So all of us agree RDX or some similar high energy explosive was probably also used to bring down the building, but we'll show that it wasn't alone. Now, the differential scanning calorimeter, a heater that measures the resultant energy when materials up. Lawrence Livermore Lab finds, gosh, at 420 degrees Celsius, maybe 850 Fahrenheit, they ignite. Well, this is exactly what all of the red gray chips did. And this is the central experiment that is omitted by James Millett, Bob Grenier, and Dennis Rancourt. This is what shows that it's not paint. It's one of the many proofs. Put it in a differential scanning calorimeter, do your own peer-reviewed paper, and show that your paint chips can do this. They can't. What happens when they ignite in the DSC? They produce what? Previously molten iron microspheres. Oh my gosh. That's where they came from. These ignited red-gray chips, because they have the same chemical signature as the spheres studied in the World Trade Center. Same enough. As if we didn't know where they came from. They're attached to these partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here. This isn't the product of directed energy weapon. This is the byproduct of thermite, nanothermite in particular. This is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. This is high tech stuff, made only in the most advanced, sophisticated laboratories. So in the 25-page peer-reviewed paper in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal, 2009, they conclude that the red layer is active, unreacted thermitic material, not paint. Paint doesn't have these exotic properties, incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic, pyrotechnic, or explosive. Why are they ambivalent on that term? Because there's a lot more research here. This is cutting edge technology. We're just getting on the edge of it. Probably the same reason that the DEW promoters can't tell us exactly how somehow the DEW targeted floor by floor, not all at once, but floor by floor, as you'll see, the destruction in precise time sequence and synchronization floor by floor. A cutting edge technology that has no proof yet. So we're looking for that. We're asking for it. It hasn't been forthcoming. So we have recently become aware of this article put in 9/11 Revisionist website, and we responded to it. And this is just recent, so we're hoping for a response. It's just paint, they claim. But the debunkers, they're debunked again. The nanothermite refutation attempts fall short, and the key points, as I already begun to discuss, are missing. There have been several attempts to debunk the 2009 peer-reviewed nanothermite paper by Niels Harrod et al. Over the years. Recently, 9/11 Revisionist Norman Swanepoel collected 3 more of them, and we counter these arguments here with the help of ChatGPT, which in this case seems less biased and more science-based than Swanepoel's grok-fed attack. You decide. So here, we had Chat analyze the results of Rancourt, Millett, and Grenier, all of which are claimed to have refuted the nanothermite report. Swanepoel's argument, Chat says, is filtered through grok as filtered through rock does not debunk the Harrod et al. 2009 nanothermite paper that it overclaims. The three cited sources, Rancourt, Millette, and Grenier, raise objections, but they do not collectively reproduce and falsify the core experimental findings of Harrod. So the central mistake in Swanepoel's framing is that it treats the red-gray chip question as if it turns only on whether the chips contain substances that can be found in the paint. You can read more about that. Here's the links to Rancourt's, Millette's, and Grenier's arguments in detail. Here's a link to Harrod's paper and his recent paper, his recent article debunking the attempted refutation of nanothermite by Bob Grenier in his video. So all that is linked to. So a real refutation would require matched samples, full materials characterization, differential scanning calorimeter under comparable conditions, post-ignition residue analysis, and a demonstrated paint control sample that behaves the same way. Does your paint do this in the DSC? It won't, and that's why you haven't done it. Neither Rancourt, Millette, nor Grenier have supplied that complete refutation. Therefore, Swanepoel's case closed claim is false. The responsible position is not that Harrod has been debunked for 14 years, as he says, but that Harrod's interpretation remains contested while the paint hypothesis has not reproduced the most important evidence. What's that? The active energetic reaction and the formation of iron-rich microspheres after ignition of their paint chips. The Harrod et al. Results remain a serious, unresolved materials science finding, not a disproven embarrassment. So we'll hope for a rebuttal of that article soon. So it's been suggested, as I mentioned, by the DEW promoters that bombs don't turn building into powder. They only break them into chunks that in turn must slam to the ground. Well, this is not true. Controlled demolitions produce all kinds of powder. They don't want to do that, but it's an inevitable result of these controlled demolitions. And they don't slam to the ground. They fall floor by floor without significant energy to produce a seismic event of note. The promoters also claim that these samples are dissolving, dustifying before they hit the ground. But you can watch these all the way down to the ground. They don't dissolve, they don't dustify, they're trailed by what? We'll see the other byproduct of thermite, which is aluminum oxide ash. Why are these multi-ton structural steel connections trailing smoke at all? They're not flammable in office fire conditions. Did they have thermite that was burning, producing its other byproduct, aluminum oxide ash? Well, let's look and see what else we can learn from the U.S. Geological Survey Particle Atlas of the World Trade Center dust. Do we find steel dust in the dust? No. The primary metal and metal oxide phases in the dust are iron-rich microspheres. Well, this is interesting. And zinc microspheres, they don't characterize or find any steel dust in the USGS Particle Atlas, nor the R.J. Lee Group, which is hired to study the Deutsche Bank building contamination. They don't find steel dust in the dust either. If there was steel dust dustified, it would come up to the magnet. It doesn't. It's not there. So what we're looking at is evidence of Building 7, the key characteristic features of controlled demolition, and some very uncharacteristic features as well. Molten steel, iron, thermite, incendiaries, pyroclastic-like clouds. This is direct evidence of destruction with explosives. With additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony, this becomes proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that's convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to sign on to the petition demanding a new investigation. And that's been submitted everywhere, including Congress, the media. We have our ongoing series. We're working on the final parts of episode 6. There's 6 episodes relative to Building 7, and then we go into the extreme heat in this series, taking the hard evidence of 9/11 crimes to court. And you can get a feel for this, and there's more evidence here than I have time to present. We're talking about probably 13, 14 hours of evidence. Here's just a taste.
No matter how improbable the conclusion may appear, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
We're bringing alive in the film the 60 exhibits of the 9/11 WTC evidence contained in the Lawyers Committee grand jury petition that have already been submitted to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan to present to a special criminal jury.
This historic investigation is ongoing, and there's a role for you in it. Yes, you can help us bring the real perpetrators to justice.
Through this film series, we're bringing together 24 experts in their fields.
They ignored any scenario involving incendiaries.
Demolition work, you're going to set charges on each floor.
The building could not have been brought down by office fires.
In other words, all of the interior columns over 8 stories came down, were basically lost at once.
I could make out what looked like from a science fiction movie, molten lava, okay?
And he paused and said, that'll be coming down around 5 o'clock.
We'll be filming these evidence presentations not only for our filings with the grand jury, also as presentations to each of you.
We're inviting you to serve as virtual grand jury during each episode.
So we encourage you to take a look at this at 911c2c.org. 911 letter C, number 2, letter C. All 5 episodes that have been made are up for you at the website. You can look at it and learn more if you're curious at all about some of this evidence. As we go into the World Trade Center Twin Towers, we can see why we're looking at it, because if Building 7 was a controlled demolition, and we've just proved that it was, then we have to look at the Twin Towers as well, in which we've lost 3,000 victims, 344 firefighters. Our country depends on us getting to the truth of this matter, and we're presenting the evidence that provides directly that. After all, look at these collapses. They are not collapsing. They are blowing up, as you can see. What are these huge clouds trailing these structural steel connections? They're not flammable in office fire conditions. They're not flammable in DEW conditions, a cold event either. Well, look at the thermite experiment. What do we see? Besides molten iron, we see thick white smoke. What is that? Aluminum oxide ash, the other byproduct of thermite that we mentioned. We're going to be seeing a lot of that. But let's look at the features of controlled demolition in the Twin Towers and see if the Twin Towers destruction has any of these features. Beginning with, is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, let's look at the North Tower. It's standing at rest, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform downward motion. No jolt, no hesitation upon impact of the cold, hard steel below the point of plane impacts. Look at the South Tower, same thing. It's standing at rest, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform downward motion. No resistance from below. which was 5 times stronger than it needed to be to support this load. Actually, 20 times stronger, as has been shown by engineers from the official narrative, actually. So NIST says, well, the top part destroyed the lower part. It drove it down to the ground and then destroyed itself. Well, this violates Newton's third law of motion. There's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. But this was put together just 2 days after 9/11 by Zdenek Bazant from Northwestern University. And he confused and obfuscated the issues. And we've proven that, we're all in shock. And he's in his den working on this. It's submitted for review 2 days after 9/11. It's incredible. Yes, there's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. Take a Mack truck and a Volkswagen, run them into each other. Who wins, right? The Mack truck wins. Doesn't matter if we drop the Volkswagen on to the Mack truck? No. The lightest part of the structure cannot possibly destroy the increasingly dense steel columns that, as I mentioned, were 5 and even 20 times stronger than they needed to be. Solid steel at the bottom, 52 inches by 22 inches. We're told that this pile driver destroyed the rest of the building, the Volkswagen. Well, look at it. Is it destroying the rest of the building? I'll make it easier for you. Look at the lower red line, the point of plane impacts. The top part is not pushing the rest of the building down to the ground at all. It's destroying itself. It's telescoping. What mechanism is taking those columns out is the question for today. And we've already seen many of the answers. We'll see more. But if the top part were there, it would be seen crushing the lower of the building. It would be riding, if you will, this building is being destroyed beneath it. But none of the video's photos show that. What do they show? It's been destroyed, leaving this assembly of core columns standing 900 feet in the air for about 25 seconds. Well, 12 seconds. So, and then what does it do? The promoters suggest that it's turning to dust. Well, it's not turning to dust. We can see the top of this steel descending frame by frame through the smoke, which it is drifting down under, as well as the concrete powder, which we're coming to. So what happens when you drop a pole that was on fire and thus smoking straight down? It falls through the smoke that's on it in this experiment by John Cole. And what are we looking at? Are we looking at a collapse? No. If this were DEW and the beams were somehow synchronistically timed floor by floor to weaken, targeting them as such, it would be a collapse. This is not a collapse. This is a destruction that looks more like a volcanic eruption on the right, for those of you who are wondering, with upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying, solid, molten objects, trailed by what? Thick, white smoke clouds. On the left, aluminum oxide ash as a result of thermite attached. On the right, lava rocks, which are very, very hot. Very hot in each case. This is not a cold event. The crush down, crush up theory is proven to be a lie, as is DEW. So we have the outward destruction around those core columns. We'll see how far outward this steel goes. But first, let's look at feature number 2. Are there patterned explosions and flashes of light? Well, seen by witnesses, heard by witnesses, yes. 156 of them. Not one of which have we seen in the DEW promotions. Graham McQueen read all 12,000 pages of testimony. He's probably the only one who did. What did he find? Witnesses like this, we felt the ground shake. That's not from a Scott pack. That's not from fire extinguishers. That's not from aerosol cans. Again and again, we're hearing the ground shaking. You could see the towers sway, which proves that planes hit them. Not this alone, but there's plenty of proof that planes did hit these buildings. And we can have that debate, Mick, if you'd like, another time. You could see the towers sway, and then it just came down. Again and again, you're going to hear this specific order of events. They're hearing something. They're seeing something. They're feeling something before the towers come down. Does directed energy weapons produce explosions before this destruction? No, they say there's no explosions. Not everything that goes boom is a bomb. But we have proof of bombs here. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. So, no, these witnesses are not experiencing this kind of explosion from these air tanks carried by the first responders. It shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking. The ground is shaking again and again here. I heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. You will not see this evidence, or I should say, this evidence has not been provided by the promoters of DEW. I saw flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building. Flashes. Did you hear that, witness? Flash. Lots of flashes here. You know, like when they demolish a building, flashing is not a part of the DEW, which is why they deny that experience, the promoters. With each popping sound, initially in orange, and then it read flash. Came out of the building, and then it would just go all the way around the building on both sides. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building. Where? Floors 10 and 15, way down below the collapsing, the destruction zone up above. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. None of this timing is provided on the promoter's material. An explosion appeared at the very top. Simultaneously, from all four sides, materials shot out horizontally. And then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific does this fire chief, this expert witness, need to be with his language? But you don't find this language on the promoters' promotions. There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the fifth floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. Seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, it seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt, all these explosions. The building was blowing out on all four sides. We actually heard the pops, you heard the pops of the building. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was. Not a fire extinguisher. Crackling explosive. Another loud boom at the upper floors. And then there are a series of smaller explosions which appear to go all around the building at the upper floors. Were these Scott packs going off all the way around the building? That's why you don't have these quotes on the promoters' promotions. And another loud earth-shattering blast with a large fireball that blew out more debris. The lower level of the building, like when they demolish a building, that's what I thought I saw. Did you see any flashes? I said, yes. I thought it was just me. He said, no, I saw them too. Everybody, I think, at this point still thought these things were blown up. So I was fully expecting anything else to blow up. You were there when the planes hit? No, I was there when the building exploded. You mean when it fell down? No, when it exploded. The widely held belief that the Twin Towers collapsed as a result of airplane impacts and the resulting fires is a revisionist theory. The vast majority of reporters on the ground who witnessed and who reported the event firsthand cited explosions as the cause of the collapse. Let's listen to this.
As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway.
Sorry, the reporters are coming up. This is the other first responders and witnesses.
As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the
planet probably?
Yeah, definitely secondary explosion.
I heard a second explosion and another rumble.
An hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower.
It just went ba-boom, it was like a bomb went off. And another explosion came right from it, just everyone flying.
There were numerous secondary explosions taking place in that building. There were continuous explosions.
No, the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were two explosions.
Okay. Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
There was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
Then there was those secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
That the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now that's the first time we're hearing that. So two planes and explosives that were in the building, is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is
a huge explosion now waiting to play on all of us.
It sounded like gunfire, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden 3 big explosions.
About 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall.
And we heard the noise associated with an implosion.
We heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us.
We heard a loud explosion, and at that point, Building 2 was collapsing.
At that point, we heard a large boom. I looked up and just saw the building coming at us.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it, came down.
All of a sudden you hear an explosion, and you could see the building starting to collapse.
Huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
According to the Associated Press, another building that has either been attacked or exploded.
The tower, rather, that has collapsed, though we are told, collapsed because of a third explosion.
And about an hour later after that, there was a huge explosion at the base of the South Tower. That's One World Trade Center, and part of the building collapsed.
We could hear a rumble, which was about 5 seconds long, preceding the actual collapse, and then a boom when each of those towers collapsed.
Just seconds ago, there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the Second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions.
And then you heard from far away, boom, boom. And you heard the boom, 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 boom.
Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated. If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
From the corner, boom, 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 boom. Just like 20 straight hits. And as the bombs were going, people just started running. And I sat there and watched a few of them explode, and it just started going pop. It just started going boom, 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 boom. And he goes, how fast? I go, like firecrackers.
The promoters suggest that the memories of these witnesses is probably faulty in the book they use. Well, there's 36 TV reporters focusing on what? Explosions? Yeah, not fire, but explosions. And these are eyewitnesses, narrative, source-based witnesses, 3 categories of on-the-ground reporting. Here they are.
But as I was looking up, I saw the entire explosion. It looked exactly like the first 2, but we certainly had the most perfect vantage point for that explosion. It was unbelievable. And
there has just been a huge
explosion, we can see a billowing smoke rising, and I'll tell you that I can't see that second tower.
Towers, a huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us.
We're not sure exactly what happened, but there was another explosion on the far side of one of the buildings from where we're standing. The reverberation and another explosion on the right-hand side.
Watch the right
it's
side.
Exploding.
It's ripping apart.
On the far side of the building, there seemed to be another explosion, and also on the right-hand side, there was also another explosion. We're not sure if that was extra reverberation from what happened at the World Trade Center, or if that was an added explosion.
We heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us.
Again, there has been a second explosion here in Manhattan at the Trade Center. We are,
and believe it or not, there was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it came down, sending smoke and debris everywhere.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
A huge explosion, a huge rumbling cloud. We're taking photographs and securing this area just prior to that huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
But it literally exploded and came down as though it had been hit.
We heard an explosion.
The explosion happened was shooting pieces of the plane. There are pieces of the plane on Church Street.
There's another explosion as we speak.
Something either exploded or fell off the side of the one building that was attacked.
Then the entire top of the building just blew up.
Just seconds ago, there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
It was just a small explosion, and then rocks and debris and everything started pouring down.
We were about 2 blocks away when the second explosion hit, and all we heard was just this small explosion. Then you saw a roar of an explosion and all kinds of smoke billowing out, debris falling down.
It's unbelievable because you hear these explosions. In fact, I just heard another one. I don't know if it was like an after effect or whatnot, just while you were on the phone talking about the school closings. I'm hearing another explosion, just so you know. I'm hearing another rumble. It's what you can feel when these tremors come is that it literally comes up under your feet. That's what it feels like. That's the best way I know to describe it.
Certainly didn't imagine that there would be second or tertiary explosions, so they parked some of their vehicles in those areas, and many of those vehicles, people in those vehicles, have lost their lives.
Well, we just heard another explosion go off a couple of minutes ago, Chris, and saw a bunch more people sort of running this way. A woman on her bike was screaming as it went off, and there was a New York City officer, he's plain clothes, walking by with a radio. I tried to stop him to ask what happened, and all he said was car bomb, and then I couldn't press him for any more information. He said when that last bomb went, or when that last collapse happened, and when the first tower collapsed, it was a massive explosion. When that explosion occurred, it was like the scene out of a horror film.
Another explosion, a rolling blast of fire, a rolling column of fire towards us.
You saw people being wheeled on gurneys away from the site of the explosion. I looked up, and that's when I heard the, pardon me, that's when I heard the explosion. That's when the second tower came down.
It was an explosion.
2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower.
Saw the explosion and also the collapse of the tower.
With subsequent explosions
and explosions were coming down the building. It looked as if charges had been set on each floor and they were in succession going off.
He received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place. And then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. But the bottom line is that according to the chief of safety of the New York City Fire Department, he says that he probably lost a great many men in those secondary explosions.
toward us, about a block and a half away from the site of where the explosion was. So their fear is that there may have been explosive device planted either in the building or in the adjacent area.
Office supplies, many blocks from the site of the actual explosion where they now...
I was actually in the subway heading towards the World Trade Center right around Franklin Street, and after the first explosion, the subway station started to fill with smoke. The subway cars started to fill with smoke, and the subways actually stopped.
And I was walking on Broadway at Fullerton, and suddenly we heard an explosion. It was the first tower coming down. I started to walk out. I walked down Broadway towards Canal, and we heard a second explosion.
Covered in the debris and the dust from the explosion itself. It was rocked with a lot of the explosion from the force of the twin World Trade Centers when they came down.
I was out front as you were when the second explosion occurred, because the explosion threw debris on top of a lot of people. That was when the real panic began.
Sequence of crashes, then explosions, and then the collapses.
This must have been ground zero where this thing blew up. Car after car after car, buses completely obliterated and burned straight down to the steel.
That's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building, is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point.
The first wave of rescue workers who went in were trapped, many of them killed by the second blast.
And escaped through the lobby where they believe there was a bomb in the lobby.
I believe the bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds in the first plane hit.
NIST and the DEW promoters do not focus on and do not play these videos because it doesn't support their respective narratives. But you heard it yourself, and you cannot unhear what you've heard. So you have to deal with it straight on.
So, Richard, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Do you have an ETA time-wise?
Yeah, 4 o'clock.
Okay.
That's 7 your time.
And just as a reminder, we're trying to focus on evidence and not on opposing proponents of evidence. So if you can focus on characterizing the evidence and not on the motives of your opponents, I would appreciate that.
Oh, thank you for reminding me, Mick.
Problem.
The seismic evidence is also very revealing at the World Trade Center. We have 2 separate events, a 0.9 magnitude near the time of the plane impacts, and in the North Tower. In the South Tower, a 0.7 magnitude near the time of the plane impacts. This gets into proof of planes, which I'm going to go rapidly through because the seismic signal, just to cut it short, in this case, the seismic signal occurs 14 seconds before the plane impact. So how can that happen? That's pretty darn interesting. The plane impact provided no seismic signal, as is proven by in either of the towers, as is proven by the work primarily of Andre Rousseau, a seismologist. So what did produce those events? Well, we have explosions in the basement, as per Mike Percaro. 2 arrived, they found the machine shop gone. These are explosions which are not covered elsewhere. Nothing there but rubble. Talking about a 50-ton hydraulic press the 2 made their way to the parking garage and found that Hit 2 was gone. Steel and concrete door weighing 300 pounds, wrinkled up like a piece of aluminum foil. A bomb had gone off in the building. So we look at the actual, the analysis of Andre Rousseau says, hey, the frequency of the Raleigh waves attributed by LDEO were only on the order of 1 hertz. But aircraft crash impacts are 10 to 100 hertz. These frequencies were filtered out by the bandpass filters. So they don't even pick up most aircraft crashes unless they slam right into the ground, maybe. So Rousseau says it doesn't even allow for the recording of such waves. The seismic equipment's not designed to detect it. So the actual waves generated by the crash had to have been deadened before hitting the ground. Of greater importance to us today is the debris, the building falling to the ground. Did it make an impact? Well, NIST thinks so. 2.1 magnitude is picked up by LDEO 20 miles north, and a 2.3 is picked up from the North Tower near the time of the collapse. But is that what's really going on here? The surface waves arrive at 10:28 and 31 seconds. The tower starts descending 9 seconds before that, but the heaviest, the first debris doesn't hit till about a second after that, and the heaviest debris doesn't hit the ground till about 4 seconds after that. So how can these signals be from the building falling? They can't. NIST actually moves the data back in a report with LDEO, Columbia University, that we don't even have access to. But there are P waves and S waves that are very well defined when and before the tower starts its descent. In fact, 4 seconds before the tower starts its descent. What could that be? And 6 and 10 seconds before the tower starts its descent. What could that be if it's not the debris hitting the ground? Well, let's look at the cameras and see if we can get a clue. Here's the North Tower. There's the shake. This is publicly available video. And then the tower starts its collapse about 6 seconds later. Here's another tripod-mounted camera looking at the North Tower, and it's going to shake after you see a lot of there's a shake, and then in 10 seconds after these plumes of smoke arise from that series of blasts, the tower descends. So that corroborates not only the seismic data, which we saw, but it corroborates the testimony of the first responders who talked about explosions before the tower collapses. In the South Tower, same thing. We have the start of the seismic event at 9:59 and 04 seconds. When the tower starts to collapse about 5 seconds before that, but the first debris doesn't even hit the ground until 7 seconds later. So how can the debris hitting the ground 7 seconds later cause the seismic signal 7 seconds earlier? Oh, NIST has an answer to this. They move the data back in this report 3 seconds, and they say, oh, we're close enough. But if we look at the evidence, yet again, of tripod-mounted cameras, we can see that they shake 3 seconds before the start of the collapse of the towers. In this case, great work of Graham McQueen. This one's more subtle. In the case of the South Tower, there's the shake, and then in 3 seconds this time, we have this tower start descending. I'll play that for you once more. It's very subtle. Ready, go. Whoops. Ready, go. And there is the shake, and then the tower begins its descent. Corroborating the first responders with explosions before the tower came down, corroborating the seismic data, which is not even acknowledged by NIST in many of these cases. And besides, the seismic signals near the time of the collapse are claimed by NIST and the DEW promoters that that it was because of the collapse, but this is not hitting the ground at all. It's hitting, it's the building contents were pulverized to dust before hitting the ground. As we'll see, there's no seismic component at all from dust, from the concrete dust. And we'll see what happens to the steel here. It's shattered to individual wall units, largely 4 to 8 tons, some of them larger, peppering the ground, again, not the ground, but what? The top of a 7-story basement. It's like a drum that's somewhat decoupled from the ground and not straight down below it, as has been acknowledged by everybody here, but well outside the footprint of the building. So the seismic signature is not expected to meet the seismic signature of the Seattle King Dome. I'll point that out in a second. But we have very different magnitude events here from buildings that are identical. 2.1 on the Richter is 1.6 times less energy than the 2.3. So what could account for that difference? Well, difference in explosives for reasons we just don't know. And Andre Rousseau concludes identical buildings and nearly identical collapses can't possibly produce a seismic event of extreme different energy releases on an order of magnitude. So we have to look and see, is there a straight down symmetrical? Not quite. The South Tower begins to tip. Well, it tips over about 20 degrees. So we have asymmetrical damage from this part that's falling off its axis. We have asymmetrical loading on the part below. How in the world then, asymmetrical damage from the planes also, how in the world do we get complete symmetrical damage? Oh, man. All the way around. Here, let's see if we can kick that into gear. Oh, that video doesn't want to play. The building, just like the firefighters described, floor by floor explosions, rapidly, synchronistically timed down the exterior in this leading corner of the building. This is not energy weapons. You can see each individual explosion in the video on all of my presentations, floor by floor in this video, which I can't get to play. So this is not a nuclear weapon going off either, by the way. These are small explosions which had to have been pre-placed in the exterior perimeter structural steel section. Do we have isolated explosive ejections? Yeah. This isn't also not explained. Oh dear. By the promoters. We have 40, 60 stories down below the point of plane impacts, these explosions at 160 to 200 miles an hour, ejected laterally, well down below. So those are not dealt with either. And how fast is the building coming down? 64% of gravity. Again, that's almost free fall. It's not slowing down when it meets the cold, hard steel below. 52 inches by 22 inch columns, almost solid steel at the base of the building, 47 of them. No, when it meets this steel, more steel than glass in the exterior of this building, it doesn't even slow down. In fact, it gets faster and faster and faster, 64% of gravity. It's accelerating. And we just saw the explosions that are doing that. And while what's happening to those structural steel sections? They're impaled in skyscrapers all around the exterior. If this was a gravity-driven collapse, as is promoted by NIST and the DEW promoters, we would have this steel not 500, 600 feet out and away from the building, hurled by some force, destroying the Deutsche Bank building. These sections are enormous, as you can see by it takes incredible force to hurl these 500-600 feet. You can see them being hurled very far in this series of videos, which still shots, which show this one about to hit Building 7, doing some massive damage to Building 7, which NIST acknowledged was not a cause of initiation of collapse in the building. What's it trailing, though? Back to, forward to. Thick white smoke clouds. Is steel flammable in office fires? Is steel flammable in DEW? No. What is the heat? Where's the heat coming from to provide this? We talked about aluminum oxide ash before. and lateral force, there's enough force here to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. Did nanothermite do this? No. We've always suggested that we're talking about a combination of high energy explosives and nanothermite. And in a 1,200 foot diameter about these buildings, up to 1,400 feet. And so we look and see, well, where is the steel? The steel, did it turn to dust? No, I see lots and lots and lots and lots of steel. There's enough steel here to 90,000 tons in each of these buildings, all around and about the building, well outside the perimeter of these structures. Look at this steel. So this is the stuff that didn't make it onto the barge, by the way. So the barge took away most of it. They say they accounted for all of the steel. So well outside, again, the footprint. This is where the steel is. It's not piled up. We agree on that. There's only a 6-story pile of steel at the base of either tower. And you can see in the center of this hole in Building 6, the structural steel perimeter sections laced throughout it. Perhaps doing the damage, or perhaps this was another controlled demolition. This was the home of the I forget the name of the agency that controls our finances. Damn. We believe there's a controlled demolition in the middle of that building also. By the way, if 100,000 tons of steel is distributed outside the footprint of the building, what's crushing the building? The official report requires all of this steel to be, its weight, to be added to the mass to drive this building down to the ground. Maybe it was the concrete, because we're looking for 110 floors, each an acre in size, poured over lightweight steel trusses. Poured over metal decking supported by lightweight steel trusses. Each an acre in size. Are they found at the bottom? No. We're missing 110 floors. We don't find 1 acre size floor, half acre, 1/16 of an acre size floor of these panels. No, in a real earthquake, a real gravitational collapse, in this case by earthquakes in Bangkok, 33 stories produced a 7 to 10 story pile. That's what we're looking for at the World Trade Center. And everybody here agrees that we don't find it, and that's the cause for suspicion. We just disagree about what happened. For instance, what happened to the concrete? Well, the concrete is pulverized in midair. With what? That's the question, right? Mark Hightower says nanothermite doesn't have the speed of detonation, which has to be faster than the speed of sound, to break up concrete. Maybe it doesn't. RDX, high energy explosives do, though. That's why his argument is a straw man. But guess what else? ASTM report C856 finds what? That concrete, white powdered decomposed hydration products is what you get at 900 degrees Celsius, 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Whoa! You mean concrete turns to powder in intense heat exceeding 1,500 degrees? Well, we have 3,000 and 4,000 degree temperatures. What can it do at 3,000 and 4,000 as a result of nanothermite? So my theory is that nanothermite was sprayed on the bottom of those metal decking underneath the concrete slabs during the many remodels that were going on, which we can talk about. This is confirmed by the Fire Safety Journal, which says concrete specimens subjected to temperatures of 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit were completely decomposed. So you don't even need high energy explosives or nanothermite or the explosive properties of nanothermite to decompose the concrete. It's pulverized in midair, 90,000 tons of concrete. And what happens to that concrete? It's spread out. 180,000, I think I got it. 180,000 tons of concrete altogether. It's spread out. The USGS does analysis. They say, gosh, the concrete composes up to 30% of these samples. Well, where is that concrete? Throughout all of Lower Manhattan, in a 3 square mile area, river to river. We have 90,000 tons of concrete in each building. Well, is it available to crush the building if it's spread out like this? And can directed energy weapon turn concrete to dust? That hasn't been proven any more than that the steel is turning to dust. They say that, but they haven't proven that. The Hutchison effect does strange things to steel, small tabletop exercises. They can elevate, they can twist and warp. They're not turning to dust. And there's no steel in the dust, even if they were. So the crush down, crush up theory is a lie. We all agree on that. Zdenek Vazant is committed fraud here. The whole equation he provided is rigged in favor of a collapse. It's been refuted by engineers, but they won't publish it because they say it's out of scope. Your papers. Wait a minute. Why is that out of scope? To refuse to publish. Why is a paper out of scope since it challenges a previously published paper in that journal? That's what you do in peer-reviewed science. So how did they get this material in? Well, one theory is provided by Kevin Ryan. They did have a fireproofing upgrade in the months and years before 9/11. In fact, coincidentally, heaviest concentrations where the planes hit the buildings. Were those planes supposed to hit those buildings? Would they have trusted hijackers to hit where they're supposed to, and even hit the buildings at all, which is extremely impossible? No, they would have had to have remotely controlled these. And there's all kinds of theories and work about that. That's being worked on. But the point here is that you could have a fireproofing upgrade with intumescent paint, which is liquid applied, and you could sneak under undercover operation liquid applied nanothermite onto the bottom of the floor slabs. It's a possibility, as is the access to the elevator shafts provided by the Ace Elevator, who had this contract to modernize these elevators in the year before 9/11. But you'd have to go through an awful lot of gypsum board. But here's what happens when you cut through that gypsum board. As we learned from Scott Forbes, there was dust everywhere in the weeks before 9/11. Yes, so Ace Elevator got this contract from Otis Elevator. They came out of nowhere to get it. Otis Elevator had been installed and been maintaining these elevators up to the time of this contract. So we want an investigation of Ace Elevator as well, who, by the way, 50 employees of which were pulled out on 9/11 to go to a union meeting to discuss business. How coincidental. In easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history, we have the complete destruction of this evidence that all of us on this call want justice for. It was shipped to China for recycling before investigators could get their hands on it and do a proper investigation. Prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, crucial evidence that can answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. But it wasn't. And that's why we have in addition to some very characteristic features, some very uncharacteristic features of controlled demolition, direct evidence of destruction with explosives, not DEW, not fire, not broken columns from airplanes, but controlled demolition. A body of proof that's convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to demand a new investigation, many of whom appear in our series, which I mentioned, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, and many of which are going to appear at the 9/11 Truth Conference in New York on September 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 this year in New York at a venue right on Golden Gate Park, Central Park. This is last year's event. We have Jimmy Dore booked. He talks about 9/11 Truth. We have Brett Weinstein, both of which interviewed me about 9/11 Truth. We have Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, who talks about 9/11 Truth and is a big supporter of the Matt Campbell lawsuit in the UK. We have many people, 24 speakers. It's really exciting. The speakers were lining up, including politicians, Dennis Kucinich, Kurt Weldon, maybe. And
Richard, are you able to wrap it up?
That's it. You can learn more on our website, richardgage911.org. Get the brochure, download it, learn more. The truth about 9/11 is really, really important. Justice for the victims' family members and the victims themselves. Where are you going to draw your line in the sand? You're going to wait for the next 9/11? Hey, we have 2 of them since then, Gaza and COVID. Speak the truth about 9/11 so we don't get a third. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. So I'm going to go around the table, and you're not obligated to ask a question or make a comment. If you make a comment, make it short. Questions can be whatever the questions require. And you don't have to raise your hand, but you can also pass if I call on you. And raising your hand will not get you earlier in the queue. No offense to anybody who has raised their hand. That means Eugene. So I'm going to start with Bob. Do you have any immediate question for Richard, Bob? You can pass if you wish.
Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much, Richard, for a very good presentation. I enjoyed it greatly. Yeah, so with regard to Slagwall, I don't know if you watched my presentation. I hope you got the opportunity to, but the process of producing Slagwall may taint all spheroid particulates provenance. We have an example in the Patricia 2001 sample of iron-rich ball leading a glass slagwall blob and a glass slagwall shot with iron-rich splatters on it. How would you address this? Is my first question.
Myself, but the other question you want to raise in addition to that one is how did lead evaporate?
No, that wasn't my question.
On the mineral wool. So to your first question.
Okay, so how would you explain the electrical smell in the air weeks after the event reported by multiple parties?
Well, tons of burning wires might help.
Okay.
So Bob,
yeah.
Hang on a second. I'm interested in hearing all your questions, but not all at one time.
Okay.
I want to make sure everyone else gets a chance to ask, and then we'll come back to you. Don't lose track of your questions. Okay. So I want to go to Patty and see if she has an immediate question, and you can pass Patty, and we can come back to you if you wish. You're on mute there, Patty. Sorry.
I mean, it's a comment as well as a question to Richard. You know, in your presentation, you go back and forth between using U.S. agency information, you know, like the geological, you cite the claims by different city officials, whatnot, and yet then you say NIST and all these other groups were lying. It's just hard for me to reconcile using all government agencies to prove your point.
This is done by
then
everybody.
Wait a minute.
Hang on, Richard.
Then
Go ahead, Patty.
using the same government agencies to say that it was controlled demolition. I have difficulty reconciling the way you bounce back and forth between using them and allowing them to explain your theory.
Yes, everybody in the 9/11 Truth Movement, including the DEW promoters, use what's true from the official sources and counter what's false. So nobody does this more than 9/11 revisionists. And sometimes they tell the truth. They have to. They're not lying about everything. I'm talking about NIST and official agencies.
And I'll use my editorial discretion to add a comment to Patty's question, and then we'll go to someone else and come back around. And Patty, if you have more, we'll come back to you. So my view on Patty's question is, at least as a lawyer, I sort of have to do from time to time what Richard is doing and what others do in the movement, which is take the admissions from government entities as admissions and use them against the government to show the falsity of other aspects of the official story. As I noted in my comment in the chat, there's this old saying about the best way to tell a lie persuasively is to sandwich it between two truths. So I can just tell you, not everything the government says is false, and that's for a reason. And but some things they say are false, and you do have to call them on the falsities and use their admissions when you can. I'm going to go to Gene. I'll come back around to Bob and Patty and others as time allows. But Gene?
Thank you. Richard, if you could just clarify, you're not saying that nanothermite was the sole mechanism for bringing the towers down, are you?
No.
Correct. I just wanted a clarification on that for everyone's.
I'm also not saying that there were no directed energy weapons. I'm just saying that we don't have proof that there was. We have a lot of unusual phenomena that comes nowhere near close to proof that these brought the towers down.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Let's see. Mike, are you there somewhere?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Mike, do you have a question?
Yes. Considering the fact that other demolition buildings have had, significant seismic readings, what do you do with the lack of seismic readings in this case of the Twin Towers and Building 7?
Well, the seismic signal was 20 miles away, first of all. So if there was a seismic signal right on the ground, it would have picked it up for sure, the collapse of the building, but it wasn't. And there's differences in the location, the distance to the seismic stations, to the geostructure, which affects the signal's reception greatly. So that presents enough question on the subject that it would require further detailed analysis of these seismic signals at CDs to get more than just a general assurance that that the comparison to Building 7, for instance, makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay, I've heard that refuted, but I just wanted to hear your comment. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike and Richard. Josh, do you have a question?
I do. Hi. So I know you mentioned that directed energy weapons could possibly have been used. So with regard to that, which of Judy Wood's observations do you accept, even if you don't agree with her conclusions?
Oh, there's a number of them. The pile height at the bottom of the towers, for instance, is not representative of a gravitational collapse. Now, they suggest that it was because the steel was turned to dust and just wasn't there. And I've shown proof that it was ejected up to 600 feet in every direction. So different reasons. There's a number of others. I don't have any on the tip of my tongue. But as I was looking through the book, reading most of the sections that are applicable, I found a number of things that I agree with.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to Jane. Jane, do you have a question?
Yeah, even though I have a ancestral scientific background that may explain why I'm still following all of this, even though I don't have the capacity to evaluate in detail all the DEW mechanisms and controlled opposition. But my main simple question just is, from observation, and this may have escaped my radar over the years, how we observe, I think clearly, the difference between the Twin Towers and their pyroclastic flow up, surging upwards, and the Building 7 mechanism. And if you have some, something to say on that, that would help.
Regarding flowing upward, heat rises. Thermite created a lot of heat. It caused the noodling of all those steel beams. It's going to rise along with the aluminum oxide ash white clouds that rise with it. That is observable, very clear. Regarding the difference in the mechanisms between Building 7 and the Twin Towers, what we showed was Building 7 was a classic implosion, controlled demolition. The Twin Towers, for whatever reason, were very explosive, with outward arching streamers of geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 8 tons and more ejected laterally up to 600 feet, clocked by physicists at 80 miles an hour.
So does that mean that in Building 7 there was not thermite or thermate, or?
In Building 7, we have less explosive evidence and more incendiary evidence. The heat picked up, for instance, by the satellites show great heat at Building 7, as well as the Twin Towers. But with the Twin Towers, a very explosive event in addition to the heat.
So just to add, in terms of the proposal that there were planted, thermite or explosive features in both buildings, so that in Building 7 it was not implanted with the same quite the same mechanisms as it was in the Twin Towers.
No. In Building 7, we have, in all likelihood, shaped cutter charges for which there were thermite-based shaped cutter charges for which there were patents before 9/11. So those are not extremely explosive. They can be heard, but they're quieter than the loud bangs associated with RDX. In the Twin Towers, we clearly heard huge numbers of witnesses that dozens and dozens and dozens, just you heard today, plus there's 156 that you didn't hear. Witnesses very explosive events, rumbling the ground, shaking them, and many of them before the towers came down, and many flashes of light seen. So a very different event.
So Jane, pardon my interruption. I appreciate your questions, but I want to cut you off for the moment. We'll come back if we have more time for more questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Requiem, do you have a question? You'll have to go off mute if you do. So there we go.
Okay. I guess I kind of have rapid fire questions.
Well, you need to do one at a time, and I'll give you a little slack, but not too much.
Okay. I'm not tech savvy, so I apologize if I have issues. Number one is how much time it would take to rig the building for the demolition.
Okay, hold that thought. Let Richard answer that one, then we'll give you another question.
We think it would take months.
And how would that go about undetected?
Well, I don't think it was undetected. It was detected by plenty of witnesses who saw all kinds of workers coming and going through the building.
Okay, and I don't dispute that at all.
One more sentence. We also have, there's evidence of many, in fact, most tenants being moved around the building. There's also tenants of half the floors being unoccupied in the Twin Towers.
Okay, and I don't dispute that at all. I just have a hard time knowing people that are in demolition in other countries that have explained to me in great detail how much time it would take to rig both towers for demolition.
Big job.
And it not only is it huge, but it's very time consuming. And whether tenants were present or not present, I don't see how it could be undetected with nobody being suspicious, nobody reporting anything.
Oh, plenty of people reporting, plenty of suspicious people. And we have the 9 months prior to 9/11, the largest elevator modernization in the world, coincidentally planned, which would give them which would give them unlimited access through the elevator shafts, through which no one would see them working on the core columns and beams in the building, at least.
So thank you, Richard. Thank you, Requiem. We'll come back to you if you have more questions, if time allows. Well, you'll have to wait for the moment.
And wait, can I just ask one more thing?
No, I'm sorry. I got to cut off at some point. My apologies.
The only other question I really want to ask at this
Requiem,
moment,
I need you to stop. Sorry.
I think needs to be said.
Sorry, go ahead,
Requiem, can you hear me?
I'm sorry. The basement malls.
So hang on, Requiem. I think maybe hang on, Requiem. So Requiem, I don't know if anybody can hear me at the moment. I think
there was plenty of damage to the. There were video.
Sorry, guys, I'm back. I need everybody to hold for a moment.
Okay.
So, Richard, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my internet is having issues. Apologies for that.
You're back.
Requiem, I need you to hold your question, and I'll come back to you if time allows to let you ask that additional question, because there are some other folks who have questions. So be patient with us. Brian, do you have a question? Brian, you're on mute. If you do have a question, going once for Brian. Brian going twice. Okay, we're going to skip Brian. We'll come back to him. Carl, do you have a question?
Yes, Richard, you referenced a paper in which Neil Harrett played a part.
Yeah.
And I believe it's correct to say that the lead author and researcher on that paper was Dr. Stephen Jones?
Harrett was the lead author.
Not Stephen Jones?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, my mistake. And isn't the simple means of refuting the directed energy proponents that they can't actually identify a specific real-world technology produced by any entity or related patents, and that if they deny that there were explosives or incendiaries in the building, I think that completely invalidates their perspective. They're just trying to divert attention from the obvious. And here,
so Carl, hang on. I need to remind you, we're focusing on evidence and not on proponents or opponents' motives. But finish your question for Richard and let him answer it.
I'm just arguing that
I don't want an argument. I want a question.
Absence of evidence is evidence. Mick, I put something in chat and I'd like to discuss with you at the end of the call.
And you're welcome.
Also,
you're welcome to do that.
I think also you owe me a telephone call from a few weeks back.
Well, I think you owe me one.
Okay, let's do that. That's all.
Okay, thanks. Richard, do you have a response?
No.
Okay. So I don't know whether Carl is getting to the absence of evidence is not evidence or is evidence. Interesting question, but obviously the fact that we haven't found evidence on something yet doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That would include directed energy weapons. It would include some issues about nanothermite and the differences between Building 7 and the towers. There are a lot of questions we don't have complete evidence on. One reason for that is that people are still trying to hide that evidence from us. So I think we need to be cautious about drawing conclusions in the presence of incomplete evidence and keep an open mind, which is why I'm still listening to competing views here. And I appreciate everyone sharing not only their evidence, but their analysis of it. I think we're going to do better as a movement if we continue to be receptive to each other's views rather than trying to see it as, we're right and you're wrong sort of thing. I think there are folks in the opposing, our real opponents, the people who perpetrated these crimes, who would love to see us divided. We need to do our best not to do that. So, Barb, you have a question?
Yeah, just really quick before my substantive question, will we be able to watch this recording of the video, because there's so much that it went so fast. There's so much I'd like to be able, I'm sure we all would like to be able to study it.
Sure, we can share that with you. It is To my
Okay.
knowledge, I don't think the fact that my internet cut off is changing the fact that the entire thing was recorded. So we'll make sure the link gets distributed. If you don't get it from me, you can remind me.
It will be 2 recordings because we got a notification that the recording stopped and then started again. So you'll have 2 files.
Appreciate knowing that.
Okay, so that will be coming from your email, right, Mick?
Unless Richard or someone else sent it to you.
Okay, one of the
Or
two.
Gene. I'll try to get it to Richard and Gene as well.
All right. So my question is, I've got other questions, but I like to try to get a really big picture. To me, the really telling comparison is an incredibly extreme heat event versus a claim of a cold fusion-like event. I mean, they can't both be true. Is that a correct understanding?
Well, they may both be possibly true, meaning it was either hot or cold event. That can't both be true, but there may have been cold parts of a hot event. There may have been cold fusion. I don't know.
Right. And I appreciate your acknowledging that you don't claim and never have claimed, if I understand correctly, this is a question actually, that you are not claiming and you have never claimed that nanothermite is the sole major mechanism. That you could, that the evidence or that the video evidence also supports some kind of major, more traditional explosive like RDX, even though it may not be RDX. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Barb, thank you. I'm going to exercise my discretion one more time to make an editorial comment. And I hope I get back. I'll stay on long enough to get back to Bob if he stays on. But because he may have some observations about your question, Barb. But to me, the fact that there were extreme heat events that could be explained by nanothermite doesn't necessarily rule out other things happening, including cold fusion. If both happened, you still would see the extreme heat events. So the real question in my mind, and I'll have to do some more study of what's been presented to sort out where we're at with it, is there some evidence that can only be explained by nanothermite? Is there some evidence that can only be explained by RDX? Is there some evidence that can only be explained by cold fusion or directed energy weapons? And I might make that list longer, but I won't. So if the answer is there's some evidence for each of those things, and you've got a complicated compound crime with multiple mechanisms, that in the moment, in my view, cannot be ruled out. As I mentioned before, it's sort of like the murder on the Orient Express. You didn't just have one culprit, you had many, and you probably had multiple murder weapons. So you have to keep an open mind and just follow all the evidence, not just part of it. And you're all helping me do that. I appreciate your patience with that effort. So I'm going to go to Ross. Ross, do you have a question? Is Ross still with us? Yeah.
So first of all, good job refuting Judy Woods. I think that was well characterized. And over the years, not just tonight, and your presentation over the years has gotten better as well, but there are a couple of, actually not just a couple, major points that can be refuted in what you present and have been presenting over the years.
So Ross, if you have a comment, make it brief. Otherwise, ask a question.
Okay, it's going to be to you. And the questions you just asked, the key to the answering your questions is in the sequential detonation, how that was done in those processes. Okay, so the question for Richard, one I've been asking him for a couple of years now, I haven't gotten an answer yet, is he refers to the dust samples being, by extrapolation, being able to be quantified. It's important to quantify those samples, but Richard, I have not seen you have not wanted to provide, or you have provided me that calculation, the extrapolation. Are you willing to do that? Can you do that?
Well, probably, I don't know. The dust samples across the street in the Deutsche Bank building by R.J. Lee amounted to 6% of their dust samples were iron-rich microspheres. Now, they're heavy, so they fall out of the dust as the dust travels further to each river. So there's less dust out there. So Bob Grenier, for instance, suggested that Niels Harrit suggested that it was like 29,000 tons or something, which is of iron-rich microspheres. But I think Harrit clarified that that was if it was all 6%. I don't know why he would have made that calculation. I got blamed for it somehow. But the extrapolation is 4 tons throughout all the World Trade Center dust of previously molten iron microspheres. I don't have the patience to calculate the whether that's true or not. I don't even remember where it came from. But somebody should do it. It's a very important number. I agree.
So let me ask Ross a quick question. So Ross, is the extrapolation you're looking for primarily a mathematical calculation? Ross, still with us?
Yeah, yes, because I have taken the time to do what Richard has just said. He didn't have the time for it because it does take a while. I've done it 2 or 3 times now. Looked at.
Have you got it? Have you got it in writing that you could send it to me, Ross?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've got it. I could put it in writing easily. I've done it.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying that with my background of being a teacher of mathematics, I'd be happy to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's an easy calculation. You have to make some assumptions. It's an easy calculation, so you can definitely be. I've come between. It's a broader range, but the minimum over the whole site is like 100 tons, and the maximum that I'm getting over the whole site is 4,000 tons.
Okay.
Of iron
Well, Ross, we're running out of time. I appreciate you sharing that. Send me what you can on that, and I'll look at it from my former life as a math teacher.
What was the number he said, Mick? What was that number? I didn't hear that number.
I think it's in the chat actually from Ross, but we'll get it to you.
No,
I don't have time to go back over it at the moment, but Ross, I apologize. I'm going to have to cut you off for the moment. We're running out of time. So I want to make sure. I think there are only 2. Well, see, Brian, one more chance for Brian. Good. Do you have a question, Brian, before we cut off? Going once, going twice. Okay, Brian does not have a question, we'll presume, unless he doesn't realize he's still on mute. So we have Jim with the question. Jim, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks very much. Great presentation. And the issue of how to prevent what's coming next. We had every area in the centers were renovated recently, I think. They had the group Gelatin that was running around doing some stuff. The Pentagon area that the plane hit was renovated, and the Solomon Brothers building was storing lots of information. Recently, the Treasury was renovated, the White House is being renovated, and other places are being renovated. Are these the signs that these places are going to be hit in the near future? And if so, how to prevent it? How to find out if these explosives or other devices have already been planted in the buildings, and do you have any proactive mechanisms to prevent what's coming next?
I don't.
Richard?
Other than massive public outreach. Fortunately, we've been able to reach through 1,000 presentations around the country and 1,000 radio interviews, over 100 million people. So around the world. So that's the good news, that they're waking up to the truth about 9/11 and that we've been lied to. And it's going to take, obviously, much more than that, and even more than a large hearing in Washington, D.C. under the auspices of Ron Johnson, Senator, who's offered to do that. It's going to take all of us and the kind of efforts that we're all making on this call now, but we need a lot more help. So.
And Ron is doing an amazing job with the COVID as well. Who are the double agents? And do you think Steve Feinberg, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, whose company Cerberus Capital makes the explosive charges that some say was in Charlie Kirk's exploding microphone? Do you have any comments on that?
So guys, although as interested as I am in that issue, it's not for this call. And we might, if you really want to talk about it, we'll set another call. But I want to go back to Bob for the topics on this call. We are past time, so I'm going to give Bob, Josh, Patty, and Requiem, and Gene another question or comment, and then we're going to close out. And maybe Carl, since he heard my last call. So Bob?
Okay, thank you. Thanks again for spending the time here, Richard. I just wanted, there's a lot of things that were attributed to me. And as a group of promoters, I don't even know what that means. I'm not a promoter of something. I'm just an observer of experiments making practical technologies using this process. However, there were many things that I was lumped in with, which I don't ascribe to. Firstly, I did say whatever else was going on, this is in my talk last time, there is clear and matching evidence to cold fusion. Hutchison effect was also there, and the processes have been published in peer-reviewed papers prior to 9/11. The subject of cold fusion, most people misunderstand that term. It was originally coined by Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, when he studied lightning, the inventor of the lightning conductor. And one of his comments is, lightning melts metals. And I hinted in my paper that the subject that I suspect to be a cold fusion. I do not mean fusion by force of cold, but a fusion without heat. So he found that coins or metal in people's pockets or scabbards during being struck by lightning seem to fuse together without the scabbards themselves being singed in any way whatsoever. The next person that mentioned cold fusion was one Stephen E. Jones in his 1986 paper, where he referred to some type of muon-like structure in the subterranean earth, which led to synthesis of elements. And it's one of his most cited papers. So that is where the term comes from. And it's talking about both metals fusing together without heat and other things. Now, when it comes to heat, absolutely, I only got into this entire research in 2012, nothing to do with 9/11 at all, because I wanted to find a solution to the energy problem. And within our second experiment, we produced excess heat, but it was only a small number of watts, over 48 watts in. What we also found out is that if you take 1 watt and you bury it in insulation, it can reach thousands of degrees until it reaches thermal equilibrium with the loss of heat from the outside. And this is basically how bricks are fired in old technologies. You do not need a lot of heat to be produced for it to reach thousands, in fact, unlimited temperatures, in fact, as long as the thing. So that with regard to heat, massively cold fusion produces heat. So don't think because it says cold, the reason they use cold is because it's not millions of degrees like thermonuclear fusion. That's why the term is cold, coined by Stephen E. Jones and attached to what was done by Pons and Fleischmann. So we produced heat. Now, with regard to sulfur, this is another point. Sulfur is one of the single most easy elements to synthesize from the fusion of 2 oxygen. It produces very large amounts of heat. We've done it in our experiments. I shared in the chat a link to one of our experiments where in a ball lightning experiment, we produced the synthesis of sulfur from oxygen in micro ball lightning spherical structures. So we did that, and it's a key signature of ball lightning observations throughout hundreds of years of observations. Now, in terms of the fuel, concrete is fuel because 70% of concrete is typically aluminosilicates. In 1986, cold fusion experiment by Pons and Fleischmann, they caused a large amount of concrete in the lab's floor to disappear, and they saw non-settling dust in the lab air. Aluminium oxide and silicon dioxide were shown to be consumed, not stopping the process in 1980s, 1990s, tests of microball lightning EVOs of Ken Shoulders, and aluminosilicate made the excess heat from clad-off reactors, that's cavitation reactors, which are essentially the same effect, go from a COP, that's a coefficient of thermal performance over electrical input of 4 plus, go to 11 plus, and we are in the process of verifying that.
So Bob,
yes.
Pardon my interruption. Do you have a lot more?
There's many things that he said and attributed to me, which are easy
I
to
understand.
deal
The
with.
reason I ask is, if you have a lot more, we might want to address it in a separate meeting.
I think that's good. And I would like to refer everyone to videos of the processes occurring, which I'm referring to, some of which I've copied into the chat.
Okay.
Peer review journals prior to 9/11 of these events occurring and observations. Absolutely everything I see in Patricia Casas's dust can be explained by one thing, and it is this process, and it's the same as a natural phenomena called ball lightning, which your president observed hundreds of years ago.
Thank you, Bob, and we'll keep you in mind for a future meeting for more details.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mick, and thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Bob.
Josh?
Can I follow up? Mick?
Yeah, I guess you can, but try to make it brief since we're already over time.
One sentence. Bob, are you willing to acknowledge that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of witnesses of explosions?
Okay, that was the next point.
I'm not done, and evidence of extreme heat.
Okay, so Richard has given you a reprieve, Bob. Go ahead and
Wonderful, excellent. So I'm glad he brought that in. So explosions one, the cold fusion superconducting ball lightning process produces hydrogen isotopes, including tritium. For instance, in Dr. Matsumoto's 1991 peer-reviewed paper published in the American Nuclear Society's Fusion Technology. I've given the link in the chat. Hydrogen is the highest per mass chemical energy of any chemical bond formation, and hydrogen is the basis for many detonative, not deflagration, explosions, and they send shock waves. Hydrogen can progressively detonate as it reaches new volumes containing it. On page 90 of Matsumoto's book, Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse, published in January 2000, he notes that the process produces hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. We actually see carbon and oxygen inside the crystal grain boundary.
Okay, Bob, so hang on. Pardon my interruption.
Yep.
So Richard's question was, do you acknowledge the witnesses who report explosions?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so hang on. Yes. Your detailed scientific explanation, I'm sorry to say, we'll have to wait for our next call where we let you unpack more details. I'm saying that mainly because of my schedule, not related to you or Richard. I need to get off this call at some point.
And evidence of extreme heat, Mick.
So, and evidence of
I spoke to that, but I can clarify further.
Well, I think we may want to have a further discussion about it. It's involved, and I need to understand some things better. So apologies to everyone. I'm going to go to Josh for his last question.
All right. Thank you, Mick. How do you address family members who feel the thermite hypothesis leaves more or major questions unanswered, especially those who never received back any part of their loved ones?
Oh, that's a great point. There were victims that were expelled up to 800 feet outside the towers, 20,000 pieces of bodies, 6,000 of them small enough to fit into a test tube. And still more than 1,100 never accounted for whatsoever. So we have extreme pulverization, vaporization of people. And this is not necessarily the work of thermite or nanothermite, but in all likelihood, high energy explosives, which we have also provided lots of evidence for in the expulsion, for instance, of the exterior structural steel sections.
All right, and thank you both Richard and Josh, and apologies for stopping that discussion because it's an interesting one and there's more to it, more I could say about evidence and lack of evidence in terms of DNA of the victims. Long story there. So Patty, do you have another question or a comment?
So the buildings were destroyed completely, and you speak of high energy explosives being used. Yet the bathtub was barely damaged. It was damaged. And yet when they people that were moving rubble from down there wanted to take down, I think it was Building 6. They actually had to use cables. So because the heavy equipment down there was damaging the bathtub in the process of just rolling around, damaging it. So how do you equate explosives being used in the basements of the buildings and then the bathtub not being destroyed?
Well,
I'm having trouble reconciling that and the fact that you had to use cables to take down a 6-story piece of a building rather than, using controlled demolition, again, if you will. If it wasn't going to damage the bathtub, and it didn't damage the bathtub when you took down 7 buildings that day and damaged others.
I think we have your question, Patty.
Okay.
It did damage the bathtub, as you mentioned yourself.
Slight.
And what we have is evidence of explosive demolition. I've just spent 2 hours presenting it. So now you're asking me to speculate why those explosions didn't destroy the bathtub, and I just don't have an answer for that.
I would think that you were intimating that there was a large volume of explosions happening in the basement, destroyed infrastructure. That's how the building started to collapse, because the basements were destroyed effectively, is what you were saying.
No, I didn't say that.
Yeah, you did. But then you're saying that the bathtub
I said there were
was not
explosions in the
destroyed.
basement, but the demolition started up at the point of plane impacts.
And I heard
Sorry, Patty. We need to cut this discussion off for now. We may want to resume it later. I think the bathtub issue is an interesting one myself.
Thank you.
And I have, I'm not saying it excludes the use of nanothermite. I'm just saying there may be more to the story. Part of the rest of that may be to the story. The remaining part of the story we don't know yet is whether something else was meant to happen at the Trade Center on 9/11 that didn't happen because something went wrong with the plan. I'm not so sure that someone didn't intend that bathtub to be damaged, and it just didn't happen because the plan didn't go as planned. It's also possible that the perpetrators didn't want the bathtub damaged because it would harm certain people's financial interest if it was. So it's a good question. It's a complicated question. And it's one of those we don't have all the evidence in on yet. I appreciate your asking it. And Richard, I know it's a shock to everybody, but Richard is not the custodian of all wisdom. He's not omniscient, and there are some things he actually doesn't know the answer to. And I don't think that necessarily undercuts his position on other areas. But it's worth examining is there a tension between what happened or didn't happen with the bathtub and different theories of what happened with the towers. That's worth examining in detail, and maybe we'll have more time to do that later. Requiem, do you have another question? Requiem, last call. I don't think you're on mute there. Nope. There you go. Do you have a question for us?
I don't know why this has to be a competition of whether it was direct energy or explosives. I really don't.
I saw your question in the chat. It's a good question. I've been encouraging people to see each other as colleagues with different points of view rather than competitors. And it'll help us get to the truth quicker and more completely if we do that. So I share your concern. And I think there are others who would like to keep us divided by having us continue to adopt that adversarial attitude. So I encourage us all to try to lighten up on that as best we can. And appreciate your question, Requiem. I'm not going to invite anyone else to answer that at the moment. But it's a good question. And it's actually more good advice probably than a question. Gene and Sandra, do you have a question for us?
Yes. So thank you for answering my first question about nanothermite not being the sole mechanism, nor was Richard trying to say that there was no directed energy weapon. My second clarifying question, Richard, would you confirm that your presentation seemed to be less about discounting the DO hypothesis and more about showing that a pure DO explanation cannot fully account for the observed physical evidence at the World Trade Center?
I think that's a fair characterization of my presentation, as you mentioned, I acknowledge that there may be other scientific applications at work here. It's just that what we've presented is irrefutable and overwhelming in terms of its evidence. And every aspect of what I just presented is actively denied by the due promoters. And in the book, for instance, explosions are dismissed on page 110 and 153. Hot molten metal is dismissed on page 263 and 295 of the DEW book. No molten iron microspheres dismissed as coming from thermite on page 332. Liquid molten iron dismissed on 270, 370, 465. Nanothermite dismissed on page 122 to 130. The dustified steel is promoted on page 131, which we debunked. And the seismic evidence doesn't deal with the real issues of the seismic, and that's as I dealt with today. And that's on page 73. So while somebody provides a theory for which they really have very little and scant evidence to support, but denies the most irrefutable, overwhelming evidence that we do have, I do have reason to be suspicious.
Thank you.
So,
And they're not inclusive like we are.
Carl, last question. Make it brief.
Yes, it concerns overall procedures. Is there a specific deadline for the group of five to pull together their, and what is that date?
That's a good question. I'm not authorized to answer it because I don't control the group of five. I'm just a member of it. But Carl, I can tell you what I know. So what I know is we haven't set an absolute deadline. I think everybody on the group wants to have a report out by the anniversary. Everybody on the group would prefer to have it out so that the congressman and maybe others could review it and comment on it before the anniversary, which is a shorter time frame. We're now at mid-June, so 3 months. So we're on a tight schedule, Carl. I can't tell you with any precision. We're just doing the best we can. So that's the most I can tell you. And if you want to stay on when I cut other folks off, you can talk to me about what you want to talk to me about, or you can call me, whichever you prefer.
Something to share now, but then something to talk about afterwards. I was pleased to meet Senator Johnson on the 10th of June, just a few days ago, at two different events in D.C., and he was very cordial. And I did hand him his own personal copy of Boleyn's Solving 9/11. And also in our brief conversation, I got the clear understanding that while the group of five has self-identified to pull together maybe a best overall perspective, he doesn't mean to exclude perspectives from within the community. And that it seems completely merited that, and I've uploaded a document pertinent to the Liberty attack, actually, the Ward Boston Declaration.
Carl, we need to get closure here, so wrap it up.
Yeah, well, 15 seconds. So format, I intend to submit to be added as a supplement or an appendix, a declaration or my affidavit as to my personal knowledge, research, and analysis. Thank you.
Appreciate that. And I think we're okay. So I think we're okay to close out. I appreciate everyone's patience. There's always more to say on this. And hopefully we'll have other meetings where we can explore further. Share what you want to by email. And I'm going to invite everyone, if you don't mind, to drop off except Carl, who wants to talk to me about something I promised to talk to him about. So thank you all. Have a good rest of your weekend and take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
And
everybody.
thanks for sending the video. We appreciate it.
I won't forget, Barb. I promise.
Okay.
Well, Mick, it's just you and me.
Congratulations. How you doing?
I'm doing reasonably well. Actually, that probably
By the way, do you
does.
want me to turn the recording off?
No, it doesn't matter to me. It's fine if you want
Okay.
to.
Well, that's up to you.
No, it's fine. My brief conversation with Senator Johnson and his very cordial receptivity left me much encouraged that I know you've wanted to keep each of these calls focused in a way that it's on something that you want to be informed about, that maybe some people know more about than others.
Exactly right.
But there isn't adequate time for, well, any of us. In particular, I would like to introduce a great deal of what Boleyn has written, and also Dr. Alan Sabrowski, what he has said, what the defense minister
Well,
Andres
Carl, let me ask you something. Would you be interested in putting together a presentation of your own on that evidence that we could do on a call?
I'm not sure about limiting it to a call. I intend to put it together as a declaration or
Well,
an
no, I didn't
affidavit.
mean you couldn't do something else with it. I just wonder if you wanted to do a call on it.
Well, I'd be pleased to, at perhaps 3 or 4 weeks out.
Well, you let me know your scheduling on it, and I'll let people know you plan to do that. And you can always decide not to do it. But
I would be delighted. But what is crucial to me is the broader context of 9/11. I find that we're always wanting to put on blinders and not consider it in the broader context of geopolitics. And really, the circumstantial evidence of things that have been happening for 100 years add to the reasons to suspect some more than others as being the driving force behind 9/11. Actually, one thing specifically.
Hang on, Carl. You don't have to rush. I understand your point. And I would agree with you that to some extent our past determines our present and future, and we shouldn't evaluate particularly significant modern events in a vacuum, but in their historical context. So your point is well taken on that.
Well, and I know it's perhaps best detailed in a declaration or affidavit, because probably a 1-hour presentation would even cause it to be very constrained. I want to share with you something I discovered actually several years ago that I've almost forgotten about, and I can put in chat or I'll email to you. And I've shared the source text for this excerpt with Jean and Sandra. Sandra speaks German. It's a brief text, about 50 pages or so, that was written in 1915, titled "The Spirit of Militarism." And it has an excerpt that is extraordinary in its description of what it articulates in its own words as being the process for imposing the New World Order. Now, what's interesting about this, and this is going back to the period between the two world wars, in 1933, before that even, I've given you a link to listen to Benjamin Friedman, Freedman, a talk he gave at DC's Willard Hotel in 1961. He was 71 years old, and he had been actually, as a lifelong Jew till he converted late in life to Roman Catholicism, he was a member of the Jewish delegation to the Versailles Treaty talks. He also had been a key figure in Wilson's re-election campaign. And he speaks with absolute clarity that there was no anti-Semitism to speak of in Germany before the end of World War I. The most prosperous bankers and industrialists in the world were German Jews, and by law, they had the best civil rights of anywhere in Europe. So what happened, though, as he says, the British, French, and Russia brought the war on Germany, which is just getting too strong economically and also militarily. They had to be taken down a notch. Very early on, the British were essentially defeated by Germany, which offered very favorable, he uses the legal term status quo ante, settlement terms to the British. Like, let's just forget this and go back to the way we were. And the British were very close to accepting when the Zionists, who they were based out of Berlin, that was the epicenter of the Zionist movement at the time, actually traveled and met with the British War Cabinet, according to Friedman, and they made a deal. They said, only if we're successful bringing America into the war and helping you destroy Germany, we would like as consideration your support for our Jewish Commonwealth in Palestine. But and they worked through Chief Justice Brandeis, who was very close to Wilson. They also had compromising fair information on Wilson. It's shocking that something that trivial can cause the deaths of millions, but I think it's a valid perspective. So from that, we get to Friedman being present at the Versailles talks when the Jewish delegation, which he's a member of, brought out the Balfour Declaration, which was that receipt or the consideration for having successfully brought America into the war and destroying Germany, promising, and they essentially announced, hey, we get Palestine, right? Now, Friedman says it was at that moment that through the German delegation to the Versailles talks, word began going back to Germany, that Germany was betrayed to its destruction by the Zionists simply to get the promise of Palestine. He says that's when, and not with violence, but just socially and in business, Germans began to shun Jews in their businesses. And he says no violence till much later in the later 30s. Also to nudge Germans out of governmental positions that Germany was deciding it wanted Germans to run the German government. People with an absolute loyalty rather than a divided loyalty. So fast forward to 1933. All right, in advance of something called the World Jewish Congress, which is a very powerful body right now. It has met every 4 years for 86 years. I believe in Geneva is where they have almost a UN-like structure, very imposing and impressive forum in which to speak, debate, and influence around the world the conduct of all, well, let's say Gentile governments to treat their community very well. So in 1933, I forget what month it was, one of the 3 or so annual meetings that occurred of this body of Jewish representatives from all over the world met, I believe, in Amsterdam. I think it's described well by Friedman in his talk that they were so upset and they wanted to bring pressure on Germany to stop mistreating the Jews, who also were perceived as having bought up a lot of German assets on the cheap after the collapse of Germany and their currency and all of that. So they declared, and newspaper headlines describe it as World Judea declares holy war on Germany, to take the form of a global economic boycott of all German goods anywhere in the world in any store that had German goods on their shelves, which this was devastating for Germany because they were highly industrialized. They did not have adequate agriculture to feed their own population. They were totally dependent. This is in the depths of the Depression on their revenue from exports to feed their own people. So that happened just as Hitler was coming to power, and Hitler himself was actually supported by Zionists, and that's reflected in the agreement Hitler entered into, called the Havana Agreement, which allowed that German Jews could put their assets without losing anything into escrow and immigrate to Palestine to help build up the new homeland or Commonwealth, and use those funds to import these otherwise embargoed German technology and machinery, all of that to build up their new Commonwealth.
Carl, are you telling me something still from a book or your own view, or
this
some
is
other?
from the teachings of Benjamin Friedman. It's also
Still from Friedman.
Validated in the writings of, I would add Douglas Reed, The Controversy of Zion. I believe I've sent you that PDF. If not, I certainly will. He was a Times of London journalist who was driven from his profession, although he's very prominent in writing several books, even leading up to World War II, that he began to write about what he saw as the influence of, quote, Talmudic Zionism in geopolitics, which caused him to be driven from journalism. So that left him time to fully research and write his very, very balanced and well-documented book, The Controversy of Zion. Among other books I would point to is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I'm sure you're familiar with him. the last books that he wrote, a 2-volume set titled 200 Years Together, A History of the Jews in Russia, which he said that built upon all of his prior works. And interestingly enough, it was published in Russian and German, maybe French, about 2002, and it only 2 years ago appeared. It's available on Amazon in English as of 2024, and still not a fully authorized English translation. It's the Russian government has yet to put their seal of approval on that translation. So where I'm going with this is the tensions created by geopolitical Zionism leading to, well, up to, now this is absolutely appalling to consider, but Douglas Reed did the analysis of what rabbis said. The strictest rabbis in the teachings of Deuteronomy, which he says rabbis agree that was not written at the time of Moses, which is how it's portrayed to all of us who study the scriptures. He says rabbis agree it was written during the Babylonian exile to craft a framework for being able to better keep control of a diaspora population if they ever got driven again out of Jerusalem or Israel. Because so they returned from the exile. We discovered this scroll, Deuteronomy, and the second law in the rubble, and it's read, and everyone cries, because what it says is, if ever in the future you are anywhere in the world, even if you're living a comfortable, prosperous life, you are to view yourself as a captive of the country you're in, that your only true loyalty must be to returning to the land that Yahweh gave us, the chosen the land there in the Levant. So what he says is, and this, it's sort of, it's horrific to think of this, that the most extreme rabbis were absolutely okay with Hitler persecuting and driving Jews out of Europe back to populate the new Israel. And if they were not willing to go, and they had their chance even to go before the war technically began in 1939 with all of their wealth intact, then their fate was preordained, that they were worthy of death. A horrific thought. So
you're saying rabbi? Hang on, you're saying rabbis too?
Yes, even the most extreme rabbis felt Jews who were not willing to return and support, the reestablishment of the Jewish state were worthy of destruction. This is in The Controversy of Zion by Douglas Reed, a very, very powerfully written and referenced work. So beyond this, as we progress up to, after World War II, the Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of the Navy, the first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, was apoplectic about the idea that the issue of Israel as a state was becoming a political football, which would be used to divide and conquer all of politics, that he was adamant this had to stay a diplomatic issue. And some strange experiences he had of being termed crazy, and even though Truman dismissed him as Secretary of Defense, he was a civilian. He was actually brought back and put in Bethesda Naval Hospital for about more than a month of observation, towards the end of which he apparently was doing quite well. He was denied access to his priest the entire time. He was not allowed to have visits from his priest. His brother had visited and said he was doing just fine, looking forward to being released. When a few days before the release date, he purportedly tied his bathrobe sash around his neck and a window frame and tried to hang himself out a 16th floor window, but the Secretary of Navy evidently couldn't tie a good knot because the knot slipped and he fell 16 floors to his death, termed a suicide. But there are many other details that don't fit. He was being demonized in the Zionist power within the press, the Washington Post in particular. I don't know the names of the journalists off the top of my head, but the book that's on point there is The Assassination of James Forrestal by, I believe it's David Martin. I'll verify that. So Forrestal was a mentor of John Kennedy. The Potsdam talks, Forrestal had young JFK, I think he may have by then been a congressman, as his guest at the Potsdam talks. John Kennedy well understood the politics of Israel wanting to, well, establish itself. That the issue that they were trying to acquire nuclear weapons came up even during Eisenhower's administration, and within the government, people were divided over that. The CIA, James Angleton, who ended up being, well, the one who maintained a file, an asset file, essentially over Lee Harvey Oswald, I think, as part of framing him to be a patsy. Angleton was known to be, quote, the biggest Zionist of the lot in D.C. He was the exclusive liaison to Mossad for about 20 or 30 years. Everything in the, quote, Israeli account had to go only through James Angleton. And he provably was looking the other way as nuclear technology and fuel went to Israel. Completely contrary, during Kennedy's presidency and contrary to Kennedy's wishes. One reason Kennedy brought John McCone in as CIA director is McCone had been the executive over either the International or American Atomic Energy Commission. And Kennedy's big issue was nuclear non-proliferation. So, it's only in recent years come out that the correspondence between JFK and David Ben-Gurion, the first president of Israel, who's insisting he needs nuclear weapons because of the threats he's being faced with. At that very time, though, something had happened back in 1954 in Egypt, the Lavon affair, which was a proven Mossad. Lavon was the name of the Mossad director or case officer who recruited Egyptian Jews to masquerade as Muslims and bomb various U.S. and British interests in Egypt to try to drive a wedge between us and Nasser. Now, that was compromised. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee held hearings on that, out of which they recommended to John Kennedy that he order the Israeli lobby to register as foreign agents. And the order actually went out through RFK, the Attorney General, but that was 4 months before the assassination. And of course, once John Kennedy was gone, RFK lost his authority as Attorney General. And Johnson, of course, was he was raised an ardent Zionist. His father or grandfather was actually a founding donor of the Anti-Defamation League. Johnson himself, I think, was born, well, I won't say what year, I think it was around 1900. But from that, we can go to, Johnson looked the other way as Israel got nukes. He had actually facilitated illegal Eastern European Jewish immigration in the build-up to World War II through Galveston. He was scheduled to actually dedicate a synagogue in, I believe, Austin on the day after the assassination, but he literally postponed that a month, and he traveled back to Texas a month later to do that. So he also, he wasn't going to impose the registration of the American Zionist Council, which essentially they reformatted themselves as AIPAC to avoid the order, evade the order. And also Kennedy had insisted all the refugees up to that point be allowed to return to Palestine, which was completely unacceptable from the Israeli Jewish perspective. Whereas Johnson, Johnson went so far as to greenlight the Six-Day War, which to me, this is key, that John Kennedy would have never greenlighted the Six-Day War. So hence, I think we go back to, some people say Johnson had Kennedy removed because Johnson was on the verge of being indicted for various frauds, murders, etc. But I think the very powerful financial and political Zionist interests who moved him up his whole career very much wanted him to be president from the time they forced him onto the ticket with JFK, which both John and Robert Kennedy were very upset that John had agreed to it, but evidently there was compromising information that the Washington Post and other reporters were threatening to reveal, and somehow Johnson being on the ticket was part of the bargaining there. So how does this bring us forward to even 9/11? Well, I think there is evidence. I don't know if I've shared with you a short video clip. I was able to actually ask Oliver Stone, who he directed the film JFK, which leaves us all speculating it was the military-industrial complex, it was the Pentagon, it was the CIA, it was maybe the mob, but anything but, of course, no reference at all. It's almost as if all of the 60s and into the 70s with Vietnam was almost a smokescreen. Maybe it was there to benefit other commercial military interests. It probably had something to do with the trafficking of opium out of Vietnam, much like our removing the Taliban in Afghanistan, who had almost eliminated opium production there. It blossomed, it went up dramatically after we invaded Afghanistan. So there can always be multiple agendas to things that are going on. But all of our movies, everything, it's all about Vietnam. When the really crucial things that happened in the 60s happened in the Middle East, and especially with the Six-Day War. And then also, of course, we have the petrodollar agreement coming about sometime after that. The Middle East has been the focal point of so much for over 100 years. So if we viewed 9/11 or JFK's removal as a Zionist coup, well, when people commit a coup, they absolutely intend to seize and retain power. That's the whole reason to have the coup. And even though for the next almost 30 years, we see with Carter and those who followed Carter, this is also actually in the first chapter. So Belinda's book, Belinda describes how there was great progress towards even a two-state solution. There was an international airport built in Gaza. And then literally, like on the eve of 9/11, or certainly soon thereafter, Israel used 9/11 as a reason to go ahead and begin pummeling on the Palestinians. I mean, remember that the dancing Israelis said, we're not your problem. Our problem and your problem is the Palestinians, they said. So it seems that when we, Arnon Milken, actually I asked Oliver Stone about Arnon Milken, the producer of not only JFK, but also, The Fight Club, if you haven't seen that yet, it's of interest. A movie going back to the 70s titled
I don't need to talk about Oliver Stone's works, but I understand who he is.
Well, one key one is the Medusa Touch, which the poster of that showed a commercial jet flying into a high-rise building. So for a long time, the ideation, as Belinda describes it, preparing minds to receive the concept of terrorists flying planes into buildings was being established. And actually one of the former Mossad director, soon after 9/11, American, I think his name is Evans, or Evan might have been his first name. It's documented in Belinda's book. Like literally within days after 9/11, he recounted having spoken 2 decades earlier with this former Mossad official and asking him, well, will terrorism come to America? And the response was, well, it will come as, Arab or Muslim terrorism and target at your tallest building, the symbol of your fertility, of your power in New York, the Empire State Building. He mistakenly thought that was our tallest building at the time. So the idea was present even at the top of Israeli intelligence. Benjamin Netanyahu spoke at conferences where he advocated something called the Yinon, Y-I-N-O-N plan, which essentially advocated balkanizing the countries around Israel to just create squabbling ethnic factions that would never be able to reassemble into coherent countries and forcibly oppose Israel's expansion. So that's all come true in the aftermath of 9/11. And again, going back to the simplest analysis of 9/11 as truly a false flag event would be that, even if it was directed energy weapons, I would say the abundant evidence and testimony of explosives and incendiaries in all 3 towers indicate that sophisticated entities placed those and intended to use them to choreograph, not accepting blame themselves. It wasn't Muslims who planted those, who had any credible access to have planted such devices, but it was rather, as Dr. Alan Zabrowski says, Mossad, by far the demonstrated willingness to use to treat us essentially as an enemy, which we see in the Jonathan Pollard case. If you listen to the things Pollard has said in recent months and years since he's been released and is back in Israel, It's astonishing. Yeah, he was, of course, a spy for Israel, one of the most damaging spies against the U.S. apparently we've ever had. And around 9/11, there were these spies rounded up who were documented in some DEA reports trying to sell artwork to DEA offices. I've since speculated. It's actually my experience. I had a very similar experience predating that by over 5 years. I was part of a U.S. Customs undercover operation investigating illegal exports of munitions or munitions-less items, but in violation of the Arms Export Control Act or various embargoes. And we had a storefront with a warehouse. And one day I was there. I didn't do the undercover negotiating myself. I helped develop the quotes that we would give to suspects. We arrested people from, Croatian Americans who, circa 1991, they were seeking hundreds of M16s and anything to take down helicopters with. We didn't give them a written quote, but they thought they could travel to Miami and get access to stolen military equipment and stolen Stinger and red-eye shoulder-fired missiles, which we actually had mock-up missiles from Raytheon or General Dynamics, whoever it was that manufactured them. I mean, these were used in multiple other customs investigations as well. And we arrested those people, most of whom pled guilty. So these were the type of cases we were trying to work out of our storefront. And I entered the door one day when somebody came by trying to sell art. And this was at least 5 years before, because I moved on from that operation in late 1995, back into drug investigations and money laundering investigations. But what I have thought is that artwork, I mean, technologies have since been demonstrated that don't rely upon any battery, no self-contained power source, that literally by, whether it's a tensioned wire or otherwise within a frame, one can remotely capture sound from within a space, an office. And I wonder if they were attempting to plan artwork that could facilitate eavesdropping on those DEA offices. It may be of interest to you. It's well documented by author Douglas Valentine, several books about the history of DEA or federal drug enforcement. He was given access by CIA Director William Colby to write the history of Operation Phoenix as one of his first books. And as a result of that, he was given access. People from CIA who had been part of Phoenix in Vietnam said, Valentine says, they spoke to him almost as if he were a priest and they were giving their confession. They told him everything. And of course, ever after that, he had a lot of sources all over and well documented that the highest levels of DEA were at one point ultimately co-opted by CIA because DEA kept screwing up CIA drug operations. So we have problems in our, it's hard to know. I think Mossad has had no problem well infiltrating every part of our government, also making use of the term is SAYINIM or SAYINIM, I think it's spelled. Author Laurent Guillenot, author of The Unspoken Kennedy Truth, has written about this concept, which is Jews anywhere in the world who are absolutely Jewish but are absolutely not Israeli are encouraged to volunteer to be useful assets for Mossad, and they'll be protected. I'm sure if there's a banker or an attorney or an engineer, whoever could do something to facilitate a Mossad project, they probably will have a means to make sure that person will never be arrested or prosecuted. But if they were, it would not come back to them as being an Israeli. They're simply have to be Jewish, and their loyalty to Israel got the better of them. So I think the SAYINIM effect would have been useful in the process of 9/11. Now, Berlin has wrote both about how Israeli entities had software on both FAA and DoD computer systems that would have facilitated creating false radar tracks. as both are useful for exercises, but also for turning an exercise into a real life terrorist attack. They also had companies within the U.S. capable of modifying aircraft, even to be tankers. I suspect also to remotely pilot aircraft. Bullet points to Israeli interests that had the technology to do that. And so back to, if there were pre-positioned explosives in all three towers, well, the people that did that weren't radical Muslims. They were arguably, as Dr. Alan Zabrowski says, let's say they were Mossad. I would say also probably Zionist loyalists within U.S. entities, but also, no doubt, I think some private contractors, maybe in the Sionim mode of helping Mossad. But the whole idea that they're going to have the capability of planting and then be able to time these explosions, but yet they want them to be blamed on radical Islam, flying planes into the buildings. Well, they're absolutely not going to rely upon 19, unskilled yahoos being able to pull off those hijackings. They're going to use their capability to substitute even, I would say, somewhat militarized or hardened aircraft to remotely pilot, to strike when and where they want them to strike. I think that's in part evidenced by, I think at least the second aircraft was found to be flying much higher than the commercial version of that aircraft can fly at low altitude. And of course, we also have no evidence produced of the 757 remains at the Pentagon or at Shanksville. Shanksville,
Hang on, Carl. I don't think no evidence is correct. There have been reports of DNA of victims reported by government authorities to have been found there. I'm not telling you that's right or wrong. I'm just telling you it's been reported.
Well, I think soon after 9/11, as far as the remains of the aircraft, I'm not saying remains of people, but Berlin made it.
That's a different question.
Yeah, I mean
the records of the aircraft.
The records of the aircraft should be rather massive, and the whole idea at Shanksville that it buried itself into the ground doesn't pass the sniff test. But yet, if the media cooperates, and it's a very sad story, and people, well, to move on from that, actually, Berlin, he visited even with the coroner for whatever the county that covers Shanksville is. I think long before you and David Meiswinkle went there, and they had no DNA then. I mean, surely DNA could have come up with after a time if they had to have it. I mean, they also could have come up with.
You mean, hang on, Carl, clarification. Do you mean they didn't have DNA results back, or they didn't have body parts?
They did, as far as if you'll read the book, they did not have body parts. I mean,
I'm pretty sure that would be wrong. What date are you talking about?
Well, I'll have to. I don't have. Actually, I gave away my last copy of. I might mention to you, I handed my last copy of Solving 9/11 to Senator Johnson last Wednesday.
I appreciate that.
We have.
Well, if you figure it out later, you can email me. The reason I say that is, when I went to visit the coroner, he clearly had samples preserved of body parts that had been recovered. The story, as I recall it, was that, those were picked up starting the day of the incident and ongoing in searches thereafter until they felt like they were done. So I don't know what time. Did you say it was Christopher Berlin himself who went there?
Yes, Christopher Berlin himself.
And you don't remember the time frame, though?
Was within weeks, I would say, after 9/11.
Well, that would be worth double checking. I'd be a little surprised if someone told them officially there were no body parts at that point.
Well, up to that point, I'll point you to the book, and I'll go back into the book myself to find the.
Okay.
In fact, I can search further and probably.
Well, I'll look for it too, since you've mentioned it.
Well, beyond his book, Solving 9/11, he has two volumes 1 and 2 of the original articles, because as he was doing all this journalistic work back after 9/11, he kept writing articles. And then, he connected dots together when he wrote the Solving 9/11, about 15 years ago almost. So So false flag blamed on radical Islam as a pretext for the global war on terror was a construct that Netanyahu has been advocating since he was holding conferences on the topic back in the late 70s, I believe it was. And he wrote a couple of books about terrorism, the war on terror, international terrorism. And the strategy has always been to paint those you want to destroy as the terrorists, even if you have to provoke them to attack you, even if you have to, for example, fund Hamas because the Palestinian Authority was too moderate for Israel's interests. They were actually, it is demonstrable that Israel funded Hamas. I think even Richard's research indicates that the October attacks were in part either allowed to happen, if not partly false flag, or even Israel applied the Hannibal directive, I think it is, even shooting some of their own so they wouldn't be taken hostage. Again, a horrific concept. But anything to paint the preferred enemy as the enemy worthy of destruction is a very Talmudic Zionist thing to do, as Douglas Reed would say. He finished his research and writing of the controversy of Zion about 1956. And by then, a massacre had occurred in Israel called the Der Yassin massacre, where it was Old Testament. They literally slaughtered men, women, children, and terrorized hundreds of thousands of Arabs into fleeing for fearing they were going to just experience the same. You go back to, the bombing of the King David Hotel, I think it was 1946, by, the governing parties of Israel were founded by terrorists. Menachem Begin proudly, he was asked if he was proud of being the father of terrorism in the Middle East, because he was part of plotting the bombing of the King David Hotel, where it was the headquarters of the British Mandate and related military personnel. And I guess they felt their out was they gave 15 minutes notice before the bombs went off. But he was asked if he was proud to be known as father of terrorism in the Middle East. And Menachem Begin's response was, what do you mean the Middle East? All of the world. So the Likud party, other groups were formed with a terrorist basis. And I think it was 2006, maybe, I'm not sure what year. They actually had a ceremony to celebrate and commemorate the bombing of the King David Hotel. Israel did. It's sort of hard to imagine that. It's as hard as if to imagine that some decades from now they'll actually celebrate the attack on the USS Liberty because it failed. So, because it was not kept a secret, it was not successfully blamed on Egypt as a pretext for bringing the U.S. into the war. I've been in repeated conversations with the Liberty survivors about that. I invited Phil Turney, he just stepped down as president of the Liberty Veterans, to D.C. in December. And during our bouncing around the Rayburn building, other places in D.C., we that's when Phil Turney met Thomas Massey for the first time. I have a short video clip of the three of us plus Jamie Raskin in an elevator in the Rayburn building as Phil Turney handed Massey and Raskin both copies of this Ward Boston Declaration. Though I believe I'm correct in saying Ward Boston was counsel for the inquiry that happened after the Liberty attack, and it was a sham. And the declaration of Ward Boston is when he highlighted that it was a sham. It was not a just inquiry, not a valid inquiry. And so that after Massey spoke on June 8th from the floor of Congress, he introduced a copy of that. It's only about 4 pages. I should strive to keep my 9/11 declaration to about that, though I can't promise.
You can just put you one on that. Hang on just a minute, Carl. If you want to do a declaration on 9/11, that's your prerogative. It's everybody's prerogative. If you want to submit it to me, you're welcome to do that. I'm not promising what I can or can't do with it. If you do submit it to me, you can obviously submit it to anyone else yourself if you wish. If you want my thoughts on it, I'd be willing to give you my thoughts on it if you send it to me.
Well, my understanding from speaking to Senator Jonathan is that he doesn't mean to have anyone's perspective censored.
I appreciate you're saying that. I didn't hear him say it, but I
speaking.
didn't hear him say anything to the contrary.
And
I'm not saying anything to the contrary. All I'm
Right,
saying
so
is, hang on. All I wanted you to be clear on this. All I'm saying is, if you want to submit it to Senator Johnson, that's entirely your call. If you want to submit it to another group and have them submit it, that's their call. If you want to submit it to me, I can't promise you I'll get it submitted as part of the group of 5 on the new report. They would have to decide that as a group, including me.
Well, not part of, but rather as, and if I can try to explain the concept here a little bit more.
Well, no, we're not going to submit anything as an attachment that we don't adopt as part of our own report.
Well, and this is a flawed concept, and let me explain why. Because
it's our process. You're welcome to think it's flawed, but that's the process we're going to use.
Well, let me explain why I think it is flawed, because Johnson is allowing the group of 5 who were somewhat self-identified, have presented themselves as representing the best distillation of all the truth from the 9/11 community. And I find that there, up to this point at least, I think there are substantial blind spots, especially in the broader
there may be, and I'm trying to help solve some of that.
Yes, and I'm trying to help as well. And so what I am suggesting, and I think it actually would be scandalous if this were not done. If
you can consider me to be part of a scandal, Carl, if you want to, but all I'm telling you is the 5 of us have decided to do what we can to inform the senator. We're going to exercise our own professional judgment about what deserves to go to him. That may or may not include affidavits submitted to us from others. And I'm not promising that. And if you think we have an obligation to do that, you're mistaken.
Okay, but if I can finish my point,
you may.
Is that I've explained to you in the group that I experienced being confronted with a non-disclosure agreement when I was eligible to leave the government. It went beyond 9/11. It was basically seemed very odd to cover my whole career. It seems like I should have been, clued in on that at the beginning of my career rather than
understood.
being told. Let me finish, please. Than being told you're not going to be allowed to, collect your retirement benefits until you sign this. So I think all of the other 9/11 secondary responders who I worked side by side with at Fresh Kills Landfill were likewise subjected to NDAs, and they probably did not take the precaution as I did of writing under protest above the signature line. And if anybody wants to come after me for my whistleblowing, in a sense, by speaking openly about my concerns and my personal knowledge, I think I'm the only person with personal knowledge of having sifted the rubble of World Trade Center 7 that's come forward to the group of 5. And I think it would be astonishing if my perspective was not incorporated in
we're entitled to that opinion. Whether we incorporate it depends on what you tell us, and will depend on our own best judgment as a group. That's all I can tell you. I'm not saying don't submit it. I'm just not making any promises.
All I'm saying is that I'm trying to think of what reason there would be not to have let me finish, please, a supplemental section to a report, which could even include
everyone else's views that disagree with us.
Let's call it a minority opinions presented in the form of declarations or affidavits.
If the group decides, I understand your point, Carl, on that. If the group decides to include minority opinions or dissenting opinions or simply separate additional opinions, that's up to them. I won't stop that group from doing that, but it is a group decision that hasn't been made, and I'm just telling you, I can't make it, and I can't promise you they'll make it.
Well, they could start to appease me by giving me a speaking role at the conference in September. I think
I'm not involved in the conference, and I don't know anything about appeasement.
Well, but I know something about limited hangouts, and I do not want Senator Johnson's hearings or the report they received to at all be a limited hangout that is missing
I appreciate
the essential
that.
perspective.
You should do what your conscience dictates you should do to move the cause legitimately forward. I just can't promise to do this particular thing for you. I haven't even seen your
No,
affidavit.
not asking you to promise. I'm just anticipating I will provide such a. I suppose you may not want to comment on what might be an appropriate format, whether similar to the Ward Boston Declaration.
I might be able to give you feedback on format.
Or a more traditional. I mean, I'm used to swearing to affidavits for in application for search or arrest warrants, so I'm more familiar with.
Yeah, they have a certain format that they go by. I can tell you how I normally do affidavits if you want to know.
Well, I have my own affidavits from my career that I can format an affidavit.
I don't think there's any right or wrong.
If you do have any exemplars you think are worthy formats, even for what you might refuse to attach, I would appreciate your passing them along.
Well, I can send you a sample format. It's not real complicated the way I do them. And I can just tell you what it is. It's basically you identify yourself as the declarant. You state that you're giving facts known to you that are within your personal knowledge. You try to limit what you say to things within your personal knowledge. You use numbered paragraphs, one fact per paragraph, normally in chronological order. If you have to cite to something to support the fact you're asserting, you cite to it and attach it as an exhibit to your declaration. And at the bottom, you say, I hereby swear under penalty of perjury, pursuant to, you can either cite the statute, which I can give you the citation for, it's a federal statute, or you can just say under federal law that the foregoing is true and correct. Right. And then you can sign it. That's sufficient. It doesn't require any magical formatting beyond that. But you do have to limit what you put in there to facts known to you, not really your opinions. If you want to state your conclusions on things, you may want to do that either in a separate document, or you could do it at the end and just say up front, apart from these facts, foregoing facts known to me, I've drawn the following conclusions based on my professional experience. If you do that, I would encourage you to do one conclusion per paragraph and go way out of your way to explain what in your professional background qualifies you to draw that conclusion.
Well, certainly, but my recollection from prior investigations was I would attest based on personal knowledge and belief, including information received from
they do that in law enforcement. They do, and you get by with it with the judge when you're doing an arrest warrant or something like confidential sources and informants. I don't do affidavits like that.
One, of course, is making structuring an argument of logical inferences that point to the probable cause of a truth, whether it be a criminal.
I understand your point. I think it works in probable cause affidavits.
Logical inferences are not conclusions per se. They're a result of analysis.
It's a different legal animal, Carl, what you're talking about.
By an expert witness.
You're talking about a different legal animal than what we do, at least in civil litigation, with affidavits, which are supposed to be actual evidence. It's supposed to be admissible evidence. It can't be hearsay that's inadmissible.
My whole career is in criminal work.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you were doing this for, say, a grand jury, and you wanted to convince the grand jury they should subpoena someone, you could probably use the format you're talking about. I don't think you can use it to convince. I mean, it's up to Congress, but I wouldn't propose that format.
I've never given an affidavit to a grand jury. I've only testified verbally to grand juries and shown them summary exhibits, documents.
But at the moment, I mean, you have the luxury of being involved in federal agency cases where they've already got a grand jury. We don't have that luxury yet. So if you submit an affidavit now, which is intended for a grand jury, you're really doing what we did in a lawyers committee submissions.
My affidavit would be for the purpose of summarizing my knowledge, research, and analysis.
For a congressional audience, I take it?
Pardon me?
For a congressional audience?
Yes, for Senator Johnson.
Yeah, so I don't, all I'm telling you is you can totally disregard my opinion. It's just my opinion. I wouldn't do your affidavit the way you normally do for a congressional audience. I would do it the way that I normally do for a congressional audience, which is stick to admissible evidence.
Well, do you have an example of one previously?
I'm sure I can send you one.
Well, I mean, to see one that you've specifically designated or directed to a congressional audience would be very interesting to see.
We did file the anthrax report with Congress, and I believe it had several affidavits, including from Army officials at Fort Detrick who were involved with the issues of the anthrax, the biomedical experts. So that might be one that might be useful to you.
You know, this event I was at that Senator Johnson was involved in for the whole day, I mean, from noon up till 10 o'clock at night, was mostly sponsored by Children's Health Defense, RFK's organization.
Understood. Yeah.
But it was directed at primarily the issue of military people being compelled to take the COVID shots when they were they were still experimental, and it was illegal.
And I appreciate the problem.
And so they've produced a movie is coming out at the end of the month titled Duty to Disobey. But part of that they touched on was the development of, quote, an anthrax vaccine. And I gather there's some inference that the anthrax letters and all that, concurrent with 9/11, might have been intended to expedite the approval of an anthrax vaccine, because it would mean
that was a theory. That was one theory.
Billions of dollars.
I'm not sure that theory was correct. It was, I think, put forward by the FBI when they were trying to blame Dr. Bruce Ivins, who probably was not at least the sole culprit, may not have been a culprit. There are a lot of other motives for those attacks, including the same motives as created the 9/11 attacks at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. They were follow-on within a couple of weeks of 9/11. They're unlikely to be unrelated. They may well involve the same people, but I appreciate knowing that. So I need to run for the moment, Carl. Any last thought or question for me?
Well, just that, since 9/11, we have now, well, I think with Charlie Kirk's assassination, it's pretty well documented that his break-in with Israel may have some relation to his death. And
I've heard that theory.
And I think we also can see that.
Hang on. Did you say we can see? Hang on. Did you say we concede?
Well, that we can see, not concede. I think.
Try not to put words in my mouth, Carl, but go ahead.
Yes, use of the royal we is.
Yeah, it's just ambiguous. That's all.
Well.
But speak for yourself. Tell me what you want to tell me.
The process by which Trump was identified long ago and over time has been elevated to the presidency, and has since exhibited, I think, a superior interest in Israel and what related interests would like him to do. And of course, all of Congress we find is virtually all of it is subject to AIPAC money. And,
well, you may find that. I'm not saying that.
Well, I'm saying it, and so Representative Massey. By the way, I was privileged to be part of with the group of the veterans, the survivors who were in his office and in the gallery when he spoke about the Liberty attack on June 8th. The first member to describe in painful detail what happened that day from the floor of the House, and then he introduced the War of the Boston Declaration into the record. So and then he had he was so kind as that he took all of us out to lunch, and he picked up the tab. What a gentleman! So I think we're about there, but he did find that it was about $30 million of pro-Israel money that was opposed to him getting reelected in his primary.
Okay, so let me close with my own thought here, just so you're clear on how I approach this. First of all, I appreciate your taking the time to share these thoughts and your information with me. I'm not opposed to learning more about the history and the context, which may have led to the 9/11 attacks or to part of them. I'm open to being educated on that, so I appreciate your taking the time to do that. I'm not close-minded at all about who may have been responsible for these attacks, whatever nation or nation's officials it turns out to be. I would only add a significant point of clarity that wherever the evidence leads about what U.S. officials were involved, what Saudi officials were involved, what Israeli officials were involved, what Pakistani officials were involved, go down the list, what British officials were involved, even if that evidence turns out to be pretty persuasive, it doesn't mean that the people of a particular country committed these attacks. What it means is certain criminal individuals who might happen to hold a position in some of those countries' governments committed the attacks, and they need to be held accountable. So it's not an indictment of the Jewish people or the Saudi people or the British people, but it may be enough for an indictment of some of their officials. And
Well,
so I'm
it,
open
I think,
to evidence of that. I just wanted to make sure you understand my position on that.
right. Well, I forgot to mention that detail about the document I'll send you about, basically articulating what it means to establish the New World Order as it was perceived by the author of this book, The Spirit of Militarism in 1915. The author's name was Nahum Goldman with two N's, and his father was one of the founders of the Zionist movement out of either Russia or Ukraine, somewhere in that area. But by 1950 or so, maybe even the 40s, he became president of the World Jewish Congress, which their mandate is working for the benefit of their communities all over the world. There is a
Well,
supremacist.
I understand, Carl. I'm willing to follow evidence. I'm not willing to draw overgeneralized conclusions that attribute a crime to an entire people when it's actually some of their officials. It's like saying you and I are responsible.
Well, that's
Hang
not what I'm
on,
saying.
hang
man.
on,
That's not
hang
what I said.
on. Carl, you need to let me finish. It's like claiming that you and I are responsible for the crimes of United States government officials in various countries over the years, and there have been a lot of them. And obviously, we're not responsible, and neither are the rest of the American people. I mean, our accountability might be that we haven't done enough to watchdog our own government. I might give you that. So,
Well, now let me speak and finish briefly.
I didn't interrupt you, Carl. You interrupted me. Go ahead.
All right. Speaking in terms of psychology, of programming, of the structures of communities and how people think about their obligations in relations to one another, one isn't saying a whole people are guilty of something, but one can identify processes that have facilitated certain results, which included criminal events. And part of that is the concept of dual loyalty, which I know one thing some members of Congress are now willing to consider is that no one should really be in a U.S. official position like Michael Chertoff was on 9/11 as head of the criminal division of DOJ as a dual national. Because
I understand your point on as conflict of interest type of thing, and you may have more to share on that. I don't have more time at the moment, as I've already told you.
Understood.
So I appreciate your time and your work, Carl.
Here's the cherry on top, is that essential to 9/11 was the privatization of the Twin Towers. They were owned by the Port Authority, and the person who interceded with, I believe, his government Pataki, and Bowen touches on this in other writings outside of his books, that it was a man named Ron Lauder, heir to the Estee Lauder Cosmetics Foundation, who for several decades, more than 10 years, has been the new president of the current president of the World Jewish Congress. So by privatizing the towers, then they could be insured by Larry Silverstein, and it was all much neater and cleaner than if they had still been under Port Authority government control at the time of 9/11. Access to the building was facilitated by the privatization.
So I don't know exactly whether you mean privatization as in holding a lease or being the owner, but I believe, except for Building 7, at the time of 9/11, Silverstein held the lease on the other towers, but he owned Building 7. Is that your understanding?
And he had obtained the 99-year lease on the two towers.
I just said that. I said he had a
Well, I
lease
think
on the
I-
I said he had a
Well, I
lease
think
on the
I-
towers and he owned Building 7, and I asked you whether you agreed.
I
If you're
Well,
just
I
adding the
think-
99-year term, that's okay, but you otherwise agree, right?
Well, I would have to rehear what you said.
Well, I'll
know
repeat
there's
it for
any
you.
necessity-
I'll repeat it for you. All I said was that as of 9/11, my understanding, feel free to correct me if you think I'm wrong, is that Silverstein owned Building 7 only and held a lease on the towers. Is that your understanding?
But the towers had essentially been privatized by giving him the lease.
Well, you're not answering my question. You're going beyond
Well-
my question. My question is it your understanding that he had a lease? I'm not asking you for all the implications of the lease. You're welcome to tell me that. But first, I'd like a direct answer to my question.
Which is whether he owned the two towers?
No. It's whether you agree with me that he did not own the towers, but he owned Building 7. He had a lease for the towers.
And the lease was effectively ownership. Yeah, I'm going beyond what you say.
Well, that doesn't mean that legally that's not correct.
Right. Well, I'm not a lawyer.
Now, I'm not saying there aren't implications of the lease that are significant. I'm not sure I disagree with you on where you were going. All I can tell you is ownership is not equivalent to a lease and vice versa. So we've done what we can do today, Carl. I appreciate all your time. I'll send you.
I appreciate your time. We covered a whole lot of territory there.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll send you a sample of the declarations from the anthrax report to Congress. If you have questions about that, you can ask me. And, we'll proceed with our other calls and see where we can go.
Right. What in particular, what you would, even if you and the other four don't want to attach it or supplement your work with what I would submit, the format in which you tend to think I can put such information best for consideration of Johnson and his staff.
And that's why I would send you the one from the report on the anthrax attacks. It may give you a concrete idea of what we've done before, which is something that I approved. It's not real complicated. So what was I going to say? Now, last question. Now that you know what you've told me through these last almost hour, are you still sure you want this recording to be preserved?
Absolutely.
Okay, because you realize it's going to be shared intact with the rest of the meeting unless you tell me otherwise.
You mean with the rest of the group of five or with...
No. Well, I don't know if they're going to want to look at it or not. With the people who attend our meetings, these meetings.
So you're, rather than let me try to do it live, you would just play the recording?
No. No, let me be clear. You may or may not have remembered that Barbara asked for a copy of the recording of our meeting today. I promised to give it to her. If I do give it to her at the moment, it's also going to include our conversation. And it's going to be shared with Gene and Richard and Bob and whoever else wants to see it. And my question is, go ahead.
Yes, I would actually prefer that they all be notified of its availability.
Well, I'll tell them it's attached to the end of the meeting, and if they want to listen to it, they can keep listening, and if they don't, they can cut off the video at the end of the regular meeting. So I just didn't want to offend you by sending it out without your permission.
Not at all. And actually, I also would, I really would like to be on your emails where you announce that a Saturday meeting has been canceled. Because I'm not on your...
Do me a favor. That's no problem. Send me an email today or tomorrow. Remind me you want me to do that.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll put you on that list. No problem.
Or is a text message sufficient? Or
no, I don't do texts.
Okay.
Email is required.
Well, thank you for your time.
Take care, Carl. Good to talk to you.
You too. Likewise. Bye-bye.